All right, we'll be live in about 20 seconds. So bear that in mind. Okay, we are live, folks. Welcome to the OCS boot camp of the Armchair Dragoons digital convention. And I see that my icon is right in front of my face, but that's okay. Nobody tuned into this to watch me on camera anyway, so it's all good. So give us just a couple minutes to finish setting up. We are in the Sicily 2 module, and I have pulled up the Western Sicily scenario. Now, if you are a participant in the Armchair Dragoons digital convention, I encourage you to check that out. It's linked in the video description. It's not too late to sign up for stuff, but this is filled up, I should say. So if you are not signed up, then you can feel free to watch on YouTube. And if you are signed up, then you can be in the Discord and the Vassal module and the voice chat. So let me, because I can't stop talking, let me talk a little bit generally about the situation that we have right here in Sicily 2. And maybe a little bit about OCS, and that'll give everybody a chance to get settled. I see 7 people, including myself, in the Vassal room. Is anyone in the voice chat having problems getting into it or need information?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine now.
Thank you.
We did have some problems with that. That's why we signed on early, so we could get all that ironed out. So we could have everybody reset all their audio and input and output devices through Discord. So in any event, here we are in Sicily 2. So here's the situation. The first turn of the game, if you're playing the whole campaign, is going to be turn 10. That's July. Well, it's the July 10th turn, even though the invasion didn't start that date, I don't think. But we are on turn 3 of the campaign, which is when the Western Sicily campaign begins. And basically, the premise here is that the American forces need to take Palermo. And there's not a ton of Axis forces, and by Axis we mean German and Italian forces opposing them. Looking for German forces here and actually don't see anything. Let me check the order of arrival. Looks like just a couple of planes. So all I see is some Italian stuff. And of course, this is the Sicily campaign. So one of the special rules I'll pull this up for the benefit of the folks on YouTube, but you guys at Vassal won't be able to see it. I have the Sicily 2 game-specific rules here. The specific thing I'm going to call our attention to is the Italian surrender rule. We also need to know whether the Allies can conduct hip shoots, which I think they can. German planes can conduct hip shoots. I'm looking for the Allied rule on this, since they don't want to remember it and remember it incorrectly, which is a thing that would otherwise occur. Okay, so Allied planes cannot conduct hip shoots, and we'll get to talking about what hip shoots are. So of the folks in the voice chat, who has done at least a little bit of OCS play in the past?
I have.
Okay.
It's a touch.
Okay.
I have only done a little bit trying to teach myself with reluctant enemies.
Okay. Reluctant enemies is a good place to start. I do think you want to move past it relatively quickly. One of the faults of using Sicily 2 as a test bed for this is that, of course, it's out of print, and it's not that hard to get, but it's not super cheap to get either. So let's just take it from the top here. So the scenario is going to tell us who goes first, who has the initiative. Actually, the scenario will generally tell us who goes first on the first turn of the scenario, rather than telling us who has initiative. By who has initiative, what we really mean is who gets to decide who goes first. And that's typically a 2d6 opposed roll. Both sides roll 2d6. The side that rolls higher wins initiative and can either decide to go first or second in the turn. There are advantages to going first. There are advantages to going second. Situationally, sometimes you may wish to do one or the other, right? So, for those wondering, if anybody is not in the voice chat, the voice chat is in Discord through the ACDC server. So if you're not signed up, you probably don't have access to that. That said, I don't care too much as long as we're not all talking over each other, and folks can ask questions. Feel free. I'm going to kind of proceed with a general turn walkthrough here. So if anybody wants to bust in with questions, feel free to do so. That's not a problem. So let me get this pulled up. And I'm going to use the stuff in the module, the charts and tables and stuff in the module wherever possible. So right now I'm going to click on, this is going to be a very brief and superficial tour of the OCS Vassal modules too, all of which are kind of structured very similarly. This is very similar to any other OCS Vassal module. So I'm going to click on OCS 4.3 charts, and it's going to pull up the standard OCS 4.3 charts and tables. So for those playing along at home, please do open that up. You're going to see that there are 4 tabs. Now, if you have a physical copy of Sicily 2 or whatever, there's going to be 4 pages on this little 8.5 by 11 fold-out. Page 1 is for air, page 2 is for barrage, page 3 is for combat, page 4 is for supply. The air page also happens to contain the sequence of play, so we're going to start with that. Once again, the first thing that we do in any turn is roll for weather. But in Sicily 2, the weather's always nice. Or more specifically, it's roastingly hot, as the troops in that theater reported. But for OCS purposes, it is clear weather with full flight, although we're not going to do a ton with air today either. So for those expecting a more tournament-oriented session, that is not what we're doing here tonight. We're going to try and give people as much of a walkthrough in OCS play as we can in the available time that we have. So just checking on that. Well, we can pretty much go till midnight, I guess. So unless everybody collectively decides they want to bail, or after I finish talking, if we want to sit down and have people play a turn, I feel like we have time to do that. All right, so sequence of play in OCS. This is true of all war games, but it's especially critical in OCS because following the exact sequence enables the game to work the way it's supposed to work. So it's critical that even if later on down the line you decide to house rule some things as far as turn order goes, which that's fine, but it's important to learn stuff in the correct order. So while you're learning, it's critical to do everything in the proper order. So the first thing that we do when we start the turn is we roll for weather. We've rolled for weather. The module in this particular game, we don't bother. The weather's just always fine. So that's our weather determination done. Then we have what I think everybody calls the initiative segment, which is technically the first player determination segment. And we roll off. Again, each side rolls 2d6, and the side with the higher total decides who goes first in the turn. If there are ties, then you roll again. It's that simple. There is at least one game, the Blitzkrieg Legend, where there are modifiers to the initiative roll or special conditions on the initiative roll. I think the Germans always win ties in Blitzkrieg Legend. But generally speaking, it's just that simple. All right. And then sometimes in some OCS games, there is a special event that happens. Like in Beyond the Rhine, this is the time at which we would roll to see what the random event is. Okay. Now, every turn, there may be new things coming in. Those new things may be units, they may be supply, they may be a number of other things. It's important to note when those new things come in. They come in during the reinforcement phase. So, what that means is that if you have aircraft refit to perform, you must perform it before bringing in your supply for the turn, which means that if you needed to position it, you needed to position it the previous turn. So the first phase that we have is the aircraft refit phase. And all this means, and the module will let us do cool things, like if you click on the counter highlights button, you can highlight air bases. Only it doesn't look like they gave me any air, so I'm going to pull some out here. Well, the Allies probably don't have any air on the here yet either. All right, so let me briefly talk about air, and then we'll talk about air missions as well. Air missions are one of your main tools to make offensives work and to try to blunt the offensives of your opponents. Aircraft counters, which look like this. I'm going to drop a B-25 in the Tunisia box here, and then zoom in on it. Aircraft counters have two statuses. They can either be active, which means they're available to fly missions, or they can be inactive, which means they're not available to fly missions. Unlike in some other games where you would flip the counter over to... Obviously, I got to turn that feature off. Unlike in some other games where you would turn the counter over to show that it's inactive, in the case of OCS, you're actually going to place it under its associated airbase, the airbase where it is. So I'm going to put a, let me find a German plane here. I'm going to put a fighter down as well. Hold on. All right, so I'm going to look around Palermo, and I've thrown two German airplanes down. I got a Ju-88 and a Bf-109G, okay? And these are going to be active planes at this time. Now, I indicate that they're active by placing them on top of the airbase, okay? If I flip the counter over, I'll flip it to its reduced strength side, okay? Which I do not wish to do at this time. When we stack planes, the stacking convention is that we put the fighters on top. And that is so that the other fella can see, or the other player can see, that you have fighters available at that airbase. Okay? It's not... You can, as long as if there's a fighter there, a fighter should be on top. That's the rule. And if I fly a fighter sweep to that airbase, then that top fighter has to engage with the fighter sweep. Other planes can choose not to engage, and we'll see if we can get to that as well. I'm going to place... I'll highlight the air bases again. Find another air base, and I'm going to put a Bf-110 down here by Casteltrovano, okay? And then I'll turn the airbase highlights off, and I'm going to pull out a couple of U.S. planes as well so that we have air to do. Let's grab a U.S. Spitfire. We'll grab two of those. And we'll grab a B-17. Okay. And as of this moment, it doesn't look like the Allies can have any air bases on the island. So all of their air bases are going to be all of their air is going to be flying out of Tunisia. And I'll show you how that works. So we'll put all four of these Allied air units in the active space in Tunisian airfields, okay? Everything is going to, unless the setup instructions say something different, all air is going to start the game active, okay? Now, if I didn't say this, it's the Allied turn. So we have now completed the aircraft refit phase, and reinforcements come in. Now, we're going to kind of ignore, for the sake of actually teaching, we're going to ignore all the amphibious stuff. And there's one Allied... I think I got slightly out of order here. So we have the pre-turn phase, which is initiative and weather in the opposite order. It's weather and then initiative, which doesn't really matter, but you need to roll weather before you decide who's going to go first. Let me put it that way. And then you have 2 player turns. You've decided who's going to play first. And in this case, the scenario says that the Allies have the first turn. So we're in the Allied player turn. The Allies decide to do their air refit, which they don't have any of. But if these planes had been inactive and were now becoming active because they flew missions last turn, we would move them from inactive to active. And generally speaking, the refit capability of an off-map box is either infinite or generally fairly high. In this case, it's 24, so I can refit up to 24 aircraft in Tunisia. That represents, of course, a large number of air bases in Tunisia. If you have an on-map airbase, then the refit capability is 2 times the level of the airbase. So we have this level 2 airbase, for example, up by Palermo. That will, for the cost that it takes to refit, it will refit up to 4 planes. And the cost that it takes to refit is 1 token per airbase, okay? And the off-map boxes, it's, again, generally free. That's not always true in all games, but it is here, because there's presumed to be a effectively limitless amount of supply sitting off-map in Tunisia. Which is, of course, not literally true, but, you know, it's good enough for the purposes of the Sicily campaign. All right, so next, we're going to do the reinforcement phase. There is 1 new unit that comes in this turn. Now, normally, the first thing we would do in this phase is we would roll for replacements and supply. We don't do that on the first turn in many OCS scenarios, and we're not going to do it here. But there is a scheduled replacement that comes in, the 9th Infantry Division. And we're going to drop that I think we're going to put it in Porto Empedicle on top of the 82nd Airborne. So let me talk about stacking, because we're going to have a stacking. It's not going to be a critical stacking situation, but we will have to know what stacking is. The stacking limit in OCS is 10 regimental equivalents. Now, the regimental equivalent is it's a regimental equivalent. It's not a step, but it's often equivalent to steps. So, for example, we have 3 units in this hex at Porto Empedicle. We have the 9th Infantry Division, and we have 2 battle groups of the 82nd Airborne. Okay, each of those 82nd Airborne battle groups are considered 1 regimental equivalent. All right. Comp group. If there's a counter that has a size of comp group, it's also a regimental equivalent. A battalion, however, is half a regimental equivalent, or RE. Otherwise, generally speaking, an RE equals a step. So we see on the 9th Infantry Division that there's a little yellow oval with a number 4 in it. That means that the 9th Infantry Division has 4 steps, which means it's 4 REs. And that counts against our stacking limit of 10 REs. Now, it doesn't really matter here because they're not adjacent to an enemy unit. But in general, you do want to avoid overstacking. And by overstacking here, I mean stacking over 3 REs. Because if the hex is barraged, then those units are more vulnerable to A, being disorganized, and B, taking actual step losses. The amphibious rules are part of the game that most people don't like for some reason. I actually think that's fun too, to be honest, but it only takes a minute, and we're not really gaining much because this is one of the very few OCS games in which it even comes up. So, all right. So now if we look at the big stack here under this American HQ, we're going to see that we have a artillery regiment, which is 1 RE. We have another big infantry division, which is 4 REs. And we have 2 ranger battalions, each of which is half an RE. And we have the HQ itself, which is an RE. Okay, so 1 for the HQ, 1 for both of the battalions together. So that's 2. 4 for the 3rd Infantry Division. That's 6. 7 for the Artillery Regiment. The transport points, those are the mule point and the 2 truck points, do not count for stacking. They are non-combat units, and that does mean that certain special things apply to them. Okay. So we have now completed the reinforcement phase. The 9th Infantry Division has gotten off their boat at Porto Empedocle and can act for this turn, for the purposes of our discussion here. So next is the movement phase. Now, everything that the Allies have here is down around Porto Empedocle, okay? This is basically the effort to cut the island in half. You need to get up to Palermo, and the Allies have 3 turns to take Palermo. Now, Palermo is pretty thinly defended. There is one specific, game-specific rule that I'm going to call to our attention here, because it's important for, A, to simulate the Sicilian campaign, and B, it's important for everybody to know that because it is going to have a huge effect on the Italians. And that is the coastal defense units. So, the way this works is the Italian units that are the coastal defense units, and I'll point those out in a second, may just disappear instead of participating in a combat whenever they participate in a combat. And then once they have either made or failed that roll, then that particular unit does not need to make that check again. So, for example, down along the southern coast, you have some coastal units for the Italians that have these yellow stripes on them. One of them is in Capo San Marco, or Siaca. And it's got that sort of wavy symbol. These are the units that do this, that are subject to this roll. And I want to make sure. Yeah, okay. So let's talk about unit designations here really quickly. So both of these Italian units down here are part of the 202nd Division, Coastal Defense Division of the Italian Army, okay? And we're actually rolling for the division when we roll for it. So the Americans may attempt to do something with this, and I think we may or may not actually do that, because advancing along the coastal road is not the way we want to go. We really need to drive up to Palermo through here. So let's see what we can do. So we're starting the movement phase, okay? And the movement phase has 3 segments: the breakout segment, the mode and movement segment, and the barrage segment, okay? And there are certain types of barrage, specifically air and naval barrage, that take place during the movement phase, and if they do, then they take place during that segment, all right? And then hip shoots can occur inside the mode and movement segment. So I can move a unit, hip shoot, and then continue moving my units, all right? The Allies cannot hip shoot. Only the Germans can hip shoot in this particular game, and that varies by game and by army. In most OCS games, the Germans can hip shoot and their opponents cannot, but that varies pretty widely, right? In Baltic Gap, I think there's some Soviet units that can hip shoot. In Blitzkrieg Legend, only certain German units can hip shoot. And it's really nice because of the flexibility that hip shooting provides. And we'll see if we can get to that. So, we need to decide what we're going to do with the Americans here. And we've got a big American force, which includes an entire infantry division. Now, if we're going to take this, let's take the 9th Infantry Division, for example. And I'll just pull that unit out here and put them out in the middle of the Mediterranean for a second. The unit has two sides. Most ground units in OCS have two sides. There is a move side and a combat side. Pardon me while because nobody but me is talking, my headphones turned off. There's a move side and a combat side, which is not the same as the unit is in move mode or in combat mode. This is one of the super fiddly bits, actually. A unit can be on its combat side, but not be in combat mode, and that's true of move mode as well. However, if it's on its move side, and we can tell which side is the move side because the combat strength is higher on the combat side than the move side, and the movement allowance is higher on the move side than it is on the combat side. So this is a 22-3-3 infantry division that we would say. The 22 is the combat strength. The big 3 in white is the movement allowance, so that's 3 movement points, and the little 3 in superscript between the two numbers is the action rating, and this is in many ways the most important number on the counter. We'll notice that the action rating of this Italian unit is 1, so that represents training and doctrine and equipment and morale and a bunch of other soft factors. It's not strictly speaking troop quality, but troop quality is one of the things that contribute to it. In this particular campaign, there's probably, let's see, the 3rd Infantry Division is a 3. Most of the Americans are probably 3s, with the exception of this stuff from 2nd Armored, which is got some 4s in it. Okay, 5 is where it tops out. A action rating range is from 0 to 5, and it can be modified by various things, which we'll get to. So if I flip the 9th Infantry Division over, I'm going to see that the combat strength is cut about in half, and the movement allowance goes up dramatically from 3 to 14. But the movement allowance is also now in black numbers. So what's that mean? So right next to the 9th Infantry Division here on the beach is this unit of the 22nd Airborne. Its movement allowance is in white. That means that it is leg movement, okay? And leg movement means exactly what it sounds like. It means that when that unit moves, they are walking. The black movement allowance means truck movement type. And it is generally, the allowances are relatively high, as they are here, 14 points, that's a lot, but it is the most disadvantageous movement type for moving off-road or in bad weather. It's also the type of movement that we will use whenever we do things like trace supply. The 3rd movement type, I'll pull out a unit from the 2nd Armored Division here, is in red and surrounded by a yellow box, and that is the track movement type. That is a movement type with generally lower number than truck movement, but it doesn't suffer as badly from moving off-road or crossing minor rivers or in bad weather. We don't have to worry about bad weather here, but there's a lot of fairly bad terrain on the island of Sicily, as we will see. Okay, so we have a 9th Infantry Division that needs to do something. And let's say that we want to, and if we want to move it, we're going to decide to move it. All right. Before we move it, now it's here. We have to make a decision as to which side we're going to orient it towards. Whether we will orient it toward the move side with its higher combat strength, or the combat side with its higher combat strength, or the move side with its higher movement allowance. Okay, I do want to make sure I'm paying attention to all the chats here. So in this case, and that can only happen once during each turn, and it happens during the movement phase. You can only do it now before you move it. You can't do it after you move it. You can't do it later in, say, the exploit phase. You can't change mode then. So if you need it to be in a particular mode for a later phase, meaning either your exploit phase or your opponent's reaction phase, you have to put it in the mode that you want right now. And this is another one of those sequencing things, okay? So we're going to advance the 9th Infantry Division, which I think is going to be the Allied backup plan. And they're going to try and cut their way through here, go through Casteltrovano, and cut their way up toward Palermo from the rear. So let's do that. Now we have a terrain effects chart. I'm going to pull it up for Sicily here. And we're going to see right away, and there's a button at the top of the module. It says Sicily 2 charts, and there'll be 3 tabs here. One will be the TEC, one will be the Amphibious Landing table, which we're ignoring, and the other one will be rebuilds, which we will get to on a second turn. So, and there's a graphical key that's, in this case, actually somewhere. Yeah, it's right here in the lower left-hand corner on the map to tell us what is what terrain. So, in this case, we have 14 movement points to play with, and they're truck movement points. And you'll notice that all of these are potentially different between the different types of movements, right? So if we're moving through hills, each hex costs 2 if we're moving on track movement, 3 if we're moving on truck movement, and only 1 if we're moving on leg movement. In this case, we're going to move along the road. So we're going to follow the road, and there's only one type of road proper in Sicily too, and that's this sort of heavy brown line with the full black outline, and then there are tracks, which are these lighter brown lines or thinner brown lines with the sort of dashed outlines. So there's roads and tracks, and then there is railroads, which are the red lines. Which are the red lines with the railroad symbol on it. Okay. So we're going to move along the road. So we can see that regardless of our movement type, at least in the weather that we have down here in this campaign in July of 43, it's 1/2 per hex. So I'll get rid of that, and I'm going to take the 9th Infantry Division, and we're going to move it. We're going to move it 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. Okay, and at this point, we are going to attempt an overrun of the Italian unit occupying this little village of Ribera. Okay, there's a limitation on overruns are a special type of combat that can occur during the movement phase. Okay, and they can happen inside a specific unit's movement. So, but they do cost 3 movement points to do. And what that means is that if the hex that you're overrunning into would cost more than 3 movement points, then you cannot do that overrun. Okay, so in this case, we're moving along a road, so 1/2, but we're crossing a minor river. And I actually don't get the road benefit for the combat, so let's just assume that that it costs a full 1 movement point to enter that hex. But we're crossing the river, so it's 2. So it's fine, and we've spent, what did I say, 2.5? 1, 2.5. So we've spent 2.5 so far. And we're going to spend 3 right now to execute this overrun. Now, if I can hip shoot, then I can move a unit adjacent to the hex and hip shoot the enemy. But the allies can't hip shoot here, and then I can come in with another unit and attack with it. The advantages of overrun. One of the advantages of overrun is that it lets the unit attack twice in the turn. You can attack once, or more than once, really, and we may actually do that in the movement phase. But you can also attack in the combat phase. So by trying to overrun here, we're going to try and see how far we can get. So we're going to see what the combat looks like. We are crossing a minor river, so let's pull up that TEC, and we're going to see that there are minor river. It's going to have based on whether the unit is armor, mech, or other. And how we can tell that is the color of the unit symbol. This is an other because it's not armor or mech. If it's mech, the symbol is red. If it's mech, the symbol is red. If it's armor, the symbol is yellow. So we're going to try to overrun this Italian unit. Now, we're halved crossing the river, so we're 5.5 to 4, which is going to be a 1-to-1. However, we are, as we say, up 2 because of our superiority in action rating, and we'll see what that means in a minute. Okay. And we're going to step through. In real life, we roll all 5 dice for the combat at once because we've already committed to the combat, right? Another thing that I had to actually do was to fuel this unit. So we're going to spend and it's we're going to spend I'll just pull this off right here. And we'll fuel the HQ. I'll get to a more detailed discussion of fuel momentarily when we move the armor division. So for now, this unit is fueled. All right, so what we have is a 1-to-1 up to, which is not a great attack, I'll be completely honest, but we're going to have our luck with this, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to pull up OCS charts, and I'm going to pull up the combat table. I'm going to roll 2d6, and I'm rolling for surprise. Okay, this is the first thing we do as part of combat execution, whether it's an overrun or not. The rules work exactly the same, but the numbers are a little different for overruns. So if we look at the bottom of the combat table, we can see that what the surprise roll looks like. This can be modified if there's like hedgehogs or something like that. But right now, we're going to roll a surprise roll, which is 2d6, and we're going to add 2 because the American 9th Infantry Division has an action rating of 3, and the Italian 202nd Division has a action rating of 1. But before we even get to that, we have to roll to see what happens to the Italians. Oh, did I close my rules? I did. Bear with me here. Sorry about that. Does anybody have any questions in the meantime? All right.
Yeah, does facing matter?
Facing, no. So there are. We will typically use in a big OCS game. We'll typically rotate counters to indicate that we've moved them already. But there's no game mechanical effect of facing. No. If you're going to ask why these units are rotated, that's a good question. I don't know. That was a choice made by the module designer, I guess. So the first thing we're going to actually have to do is, because we're about to fight with this Italian unit, is we got to determine if that guy's going to go away or not. We're going to roll 1d6 to determine that. And according to the game-specific rule, on a 1 to 4, it goes in the dead pile, and on a 5 to 6, it fights normally. So we don't have to... we don't actually have to fight with this guy. So not only does this guy go to the dead pile, but everybody else in the 202nd Coastal Defense Division goes in the dead pile as well. That's probably the only 2, but there might be another one. Nope, there's another one right here. Marsala. There's 2 more. So you can see how maybe you can't quite count on the Italians to hold anything here. Those coastal defense units are the only units that are subject to that, though. These mixed battalions up in the rough terrain, those will not suffer from that. And this is why I will normally go this way too with an infantry division. So they're about to participate. Let me check something on the rule. All right. So the way this rule works is we make that roll before we start making rolls on the combat, before we start expending supply. So the combat did not cost supply, but I did have to spend the 3 movement points to do the overrun. So to get to this hex, we're at 5.5. So 6, 7, 7.5. I enter Siaka, which includes an Italian air base, which we might be able to use now. But it also contains some supply that previously was controlled by the Axis. we're now going to roll to try to capture that supply. So I'm going to pull up the supply capture table, and this is a dump on the ground. This is on the 4th page of the charts and tables, and I'm just going to roll a d6. And I rolled a 3. That is 25%. We would round normally here. So if say this was if there was 1 token left and it was I got 50%, then it would round up to 1 token. So in this case, how much is captured is 1 token. Okay, so I'm going to decrease this quantity, and then I'll talk about that very briefly. So there's 2 types of supply in OCS, okay? They're both equally important. One is trace supply, and the other are supply points. Trace supply is the beans, okay? It's what keep your units from suffering attrition. SPs are the bullets. SPs are the things that let you fuel your motorized units, will let you actually fight combats at full efficiency, okay? So we've captured a token here. And we need to change this, change side. So you can see the vassal module changes it to A rather than X for axis. All right, so we were at 5.5, 6, 7 points here. So we're next going to go. We've also captured this air base. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We're going to drive through right through Castel Trevano. That's going to force that German air unit to displace. Pull that up real quick. I'm trying to remember if I have to make a roll to for that air unit to displace. We're going to say no in this case. We'll just rebase him up to the air base near Palermo, but he is going to be made inactive by that, so he will displace. He will be placed under the air base. Okay. I do have, by the way, I'll mention this for the benefit of everybody watching. One of the things I'm working on as a channel project is an OCS video tutorial series, the first episode of which is fairly well along. I hope to have it released this month. So we'll have this up, but that will replace all of my previous tutorial efforts. So we've actually finished moving the 9th Infantry Division here. Okay, and it's done for the turn. So let's say I want to rotate counterclockwise just to show that that unit is done.
A quick question on the airbase. Does it change markers or anything to indicate ownership then after you captured it?
It does not. Well, so in physical play, no. There's not a formal thing that says the marker changes color. In the vassal modules, yeah, you can absolutely do that. And if we're playing with my marker set, I make sure that there are 2 different colors of air bases available for that reason. But officially, there's no rule that that says you got to change the color on the air base. You're just kind of supposed to know. And generally speaking, honestly, that's not much of a problem. Yeah, we do have to roll. We do have to roll for that air unit. So let's roll for that air unit. That's a 7, no loss. So it did not lose a step. It can lose a step. So, all right. So we've moved that 1 unit. So let's move another unit, and then I'll let one of you guys move a unit. But the other unit I'm going to move is the 2nd Armored Division. And I'm going to do some ASL magic here to make this happen. So in order to, anything that's not leg movement, all right, needs to be fueled to move. And there are 2 different ways to fuel those units? Well, there's 3 different ways. You can either fuel them individually, and that costs 1 token per unit, or you can fuel them from an HQ. If they're independent units, you can fuel the HQ instead, and they can use that fuel. But there's not really any allied independent. Is that actually true? That's kind of not true here. Well, we've already fueled this HQ though, so this HQ is fueled, but the second armored needs to. You can fuel it by unit, but you can see that it's a huge formation, and it would cost like 2.5 supply points, going 1 token per. So you actually want to fuel it by division, and we're going to fuel it therefore from this allied, and I'll show you how to trace that. So it's going to cost me 1 supply point to put the entire second armored division in fueled status. So I'm going to select the second armor division marker, and I'm going to mark it fueled. Okay, and I got to take a supply point from somewhere. The supply point can either be drawn directly from the map within 5 movement points, 5 truck movement points, or it can be thrown by an HQ that can directly draw it from the map. Direct draw is 5 movement points, and throw is the HQ's throw range. So we see this American HQ here that's got a 14-0 on the counter. Okay, the 14 is the throw range. The 0 is its movement. That does mean that on that side, which is its combat side, it cannot move. If, for example, the hex gets attacked and it's forced to retreat, then it flips involuntarily to its move side to perform the retreat. And it will have a lesser throw range. So, we have some French colonial commandos here who have captured some supply. Can we reach that from second armored? Well, it's 5 truck movement points to get at least adjacent to that unit. So we can count. I'll use this. We can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 puts us right here, and we're reaching backward from the unit to the supply. Okay, if it's being thrown by an HQ, then it comes forward from the HQ. That's an important distinction that we're probably not going to fully explore today. Okay, so we can just reach it off the ground. Do you have a question?
Are you allowed to go off the edge of the scenario map?
That's a good question. I'd say yes in this particular case. Even if we're not, however, watch this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I could still get there tracing this trail. I care less about showing you about not going off the edge of the scenario map than I care about showing you how the supply works. So now I'm going to show you the other way. So let's first of all spend the supply so I don't forget to do that. And on vassal modules, I tend to pull it off to one side because I'll need it for change or something eventually. We know it's going to come from here. All right. Let's say I want to throw it from the HQ. Okay, so the HQ... Let me grab a KTX marker for this. The HQ can go 1, 2 to get to that hex. All right. So the HQ again has to be able to get the supply by tracing back from the HQ 5 movement points to get adjacent to the supply. Okay. I think that probably isn't as clear as I could phrase it. I'm going to move the supply. Okay. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now this is a long way too, right? So, I mean, bear that in mind. So I'm going to trace it all the way back. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. If the supply, and it's truck movement. So if it's off-road or it's muddy or something like that, then that range gets really short really fast. But like on a primary road or secondary road, it tends to be quite a ways. So I'm tracing 5 truck movement back from the HQ to reach the supply, which is adjacent to where I ended up. Okay, and then the HQ can throw up to 14 truck movement points ahead. So I can throw. I'm going to put the supply back now, so I don't accidentally leave it out in the middle of nowhere. So watch this. I don't know if it'll work, but we're gonna find out. So can this HQ throw to this 9th Infantry Division? Well, we better hope so, because otherwise 9th Infantry Division might be in trouble. So we're gonna go 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that 14 throw range on the secondary, I'm going to call them secondary roads because they're drawn like secondary roads, but there are no primary roads on this map, can reach almost all the way up to Palermo by itself by following this particular path. Okay. So what that means is that the 9th Infantry Division is in trace supply because it can be thrown trace supply from NHQ. And we'll look more at that in the supply phase. Okay. So, but right now, I have fueled the 2nd Armored Division. And the first thing I'm going to do is move the entire formation. I'm going to pull the truck out because the truck doesn't have a move mode side. Or I should say it's always considered in move mode. I'm going to flip the entire stack to move mode. And then I'll put the truck on. There's nothing that says you got to do it this way. I just always put the truck on the bottom. Okay. Now, looking at 2nd Armored Division, we're going to see that it's all track movement. And the fastest units there are those light and recon units. They can move 16, but the rest can move 14. So what I am going to do here, I'm going to pull up an off-board box, and I'm going to pull out an Allied reserve marker. Now, each side will have a specific number of reserve markers available to them in the scenario. And I can use during mode determination, which again is just the last thing I do before I start actually moving the unit. I can put the unit in reserve mode. So I'm going to do that right now. All right. And then I'm going to pull up a calculator because I have to do math now. And I have to do 14 divided by 4. I can move those units 3.5 movement points in reserve mode. Now, then I can move them again during the exploit phase. That's the trick. So we're going to move them 3.5 movement points right now. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3.5. Okay. Now you'll notice that means that there's a couple extra movement points that the light units didn't, or I guess 1/2 extra movement point that the light units could have spent, but it's more important to move the whole stack together because if they are going to overrun, then they have to start that movement together. And it's kind of likely that they will be asked to overrun. Okay. All right. So, who would like to nominate themselves to move some Allied pieces? I'll keep going if necessary.
I'll move some pieces.
Okay. So if you're in as Allied, that's great. If not, click the retire button at the top near the upper left-hand corner and select the Allied side.
Retire. And your current side is observer. Where I can't select.
You can't select the Allied side?
I can only select Axis.
Well, that's irritating. Go ahead and go back to observer.
Someone else must be Allied already.
Yeah, the vassal module may not be accommodating multiple people as Allied. That may be the problem.
Let me see if I try it again. Nope.
Go ahead and try and do it as an observer. I think you'll be able to actually do it.
Observer.
Solo might let you do
She
better.
grabbed Allied.
Yeah, but you can only sign up one person as solo too. So So
All
you,
right.
you could do the Fog of War feature is not implemented on this particular version of the module, so I think you can do anything you need to do as observer. And you can sign up an unlimited number of observers. So you should be okay. I'm gonna do some counter rotation here though, because okay.
All right.
Okay. So based on what I've said so far, what options do you think you have? Based on that you have to get up to Palermo in 3 turns and take Palermo. And bear in mind that the Italians are probably going to try and put some units in Palermo too, right? So you might need a turn to take it.
Well, I mean, I guess I could just go north. Well, is that north? Yeah, I mean, I
Yes,
guess
it is north.
north on that road, which then does that become a trail or?
So let me grab my KTX marker here. So this is a trail, okay? The
Okay.
movement cost for these is 1 per hex. This road is a road, and it is 1/2 per hex.
All right.
So
then
to answer your question, you really need to try to advance along the road.
Gotcha. All right. So, and I'm moving from that stack, right, within.
Yeah, so you can move anything in the 82nd Airborne, the 282nd Airborne stacks, or anything that you would like in the stack with the HQs.
Let me see. Where's the? Okay, so the 82nd Airborne.
I'm going to reorganize this stack because I think whoever set the thing up in the module didn't think of this. The Mule has a fueled side, so it's carrying fuel, but it's only got 6 movement points, but it's also leg. The trucks, the way the counters were set up, if the trucks are carrying fuel, the SPs are supposed to be underneath the trucks. But you can start the scenario if you want with the SPs on trucks. So I just did that. So Hethwill has asked a chat question, and I'm not sure I understand the question. There are no supply depots formally. HQs can throw trace supply to everybody, but you have to spend supply to fuel units that require fuel. So the units you have available to move are basically any unit, any U.S. unit here that's oriented normally. The only units I've moved are the 9th Infantry Division and the 2nd Armored.
Okay. So
And you're going to move units. You can move units by stack if you want, or you can move them one at a time. Generally speaking, the only good reason to move them by stack is if you intend to overrun with them.
Okay. All right. So in that case, then from that big stack here, can I take the one that has 20?
So you want the 3rd Infantry Division? Is that what you're talking about?
It has a 36 on it. You know.
A 36 on it.
Yeah. Just north of Agrigento, that stack.
Uh-huh. Okay, so what's in there? Let me, first of all, get rid of this label because it's going to annoy me if I don't. I'm going to read from the top down. You have the HQ, okay, which is the one with the American flag on it. You have a U.S. Ranger battalion, well, 2 U.S. Ranger battalions, which are the 343 and 353 commando units with the commando symbol. You have the big infantry division, that's the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, okay? Then you have an artillery brigade, and then you have some transport points, which are the mule and the 2 trucks, okay? And then in the other stacks, you have another ranger unit that's up in hex number 2513, and then you have some 82nd Airborne guys on the coast. The 82nd Airborne guys are probably, if you try and flip these, you're going to see that they're leg on the backside too, so they don't have a lot of range right in this particular scenario. And normally what you would do with those with units in this position, at least for now, is they would probably be guarding those ports. So they're probably where you want to have them. So I think what you really have to work with here is that big infantry division, the commandos, and the artillery unit. And the HQ if you'd like to move the HQ. But you got to be careful with that, right? Because you have to keep that 9th Infantry Division in supply as well.
All right. So let's see. With the what is it? The 82nd Airborne down here in Porto, whatever that is.
Porto Empedocles.
Yeah, Porto. Thank you. So if I want to move that and I move it individually, I have to flip them over to their movement side.
No, they can move on their combat side. They'll just have lower movement, right? So look, I'm looking at the top. Let me pull the top Allied Airborne, 82nd Airborne unit just off into the med for a second here, okay? So right now it's on at 245. It's got a lower movement, but higher movement, lower combat. I'm going to flip it over, and it goes to 343, which means it's got a higher combat value and a lower movement value. So it doesn't have to be on move mode it's on its move side to move, but it's more mobile. Any unit is going to be more mobile on its move side than it will on the combat side.
Are you flipping it over?
So if you right-click, so I'm going to keep saying that because that's what you would physically do with physical pieces. The back side is the move side. In this case, I'm right-clicking on the unit and clicking move mode, or you can highlight the unit and hit Control F to flip it from front to back.
Move mode. I see it now. Okay.
Yeah. And again, you make that decision right before you decide to move it.
Okay. So that was in 24-8, right?
You
So
you just put it back in the correct spot. It's
Right.
That's 2409.
Oh, sorry, 24-09. So if I want to move him, let me check the where's the movement chart, right?
Okay, so if you click on Sicily 2 charts,
Right.
you will get the terrain effects chart, which will tell you the movement costs for all the different terrain.
So road is 1/2 for leg?
Road is 1/2 for leg. Track is 1, but road is 1/2 for leg.
Okay, so he just goes half, 1, 1.5.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to pay to go over the...
No, because
Okay.
you're following a road.
So then that's 2, 2.5, and 3. And I guess that's about as far as he can go.
Yes,
That's why it goes to move mode.
exactly. So had he gone, let's put him back for a second. If he goes to move mode, I'll use the hotkey. Now he can go half, 1, 2, 3, 4, and he can be guarding this port into which the Allies can, in principle, ship supplies. The capacity of this Sierra or Siaka is 1T, which means you can ship 1 token of stuff into that port during the movement phase.
I would move them 2 more hexes.
You can do that.
Enfi. That blocks the road. And you've got 2 other battalions you can move into Cap San Marco.
So right now, this 505th battle group of the 82nd Airborne is guarding nothing obvious. And he's right. So in principle, the Italians...
Actually, he's going for that supply point off in Marsala.
Well, he won't be able to get there this turn.
Not this turn, no. Historically, that's what the 82nd did, though.
I mean, that would make sense.
82nd just charged out to Marsala.
So you can absolutely do that. And it wouldn't maybe not have been a terrible idea to bust off a little bit of 9th. So you can break these units down too, and that happens at a specified time, and I don't really want to get into that today, but you can, in principle, if you've worked this out, say, okay, I'm about to move the 9th Infantry Division from the place it started. I'm going to grab a breakdown unit, give the 9th Infantry Division a step loss, and then I can move the breakdown unit. But the breakdown unit is not going to have the truck movement on its move side. I don't think. That won't be the case in most OCS games. So you won't have the mobility. But that is a thing that you can do.
But in the mode and movement segment, before you move a unit, that's the moment you decide whether or not it's going to be on its combat side or okay. So it's not like you have to decide all of them. Okay.
Oh well, so in at least to my recollection, in some of the really old games, it actually did work that way. But that hasn't been the case for at least a very long time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, so you do have the other 82nd Airborne unit to move. And go in and try to capture that juicy supply point in Marsala is really not a bad idea at all. In this game, there's no, like, intrinsic hex strength or anything like that. If there's no unit there, there's no unit there. In something like Blitzkrieg Legend, there can be a large quantity of strength in a hex that's like a fortress hex or something like that. All right. Do you want to move that 505th battle group unit?
Sure.
The second one?
Somebody. So, yes. Somebody else do it.
Were there two battalions in that stack?
Sorry, what?
Were there two battle groups in that stack?
There were.
Oh.
And they're both the
two?
505th, too.
Ah, okay. So they're identically labeled. I thought there was some sort of weird thing going on.
I'm going to assume that they're supposed to be there at this point. It's possible it's a hiccup in the module, but we're going to proceed as though it wasn't.
And then you rotate it.
And then control square, the two control square bracket keys will rotate counters for you, by the way. That is a thing that is different in every module. Some modules don't have counter rotation at all. But it's useful to know that particular command, especially in games for which facing is important. It's really not particularly here. Okay, so who wants to be in charge of the U.S. Army Rangers? All right.
What is the significance of the 82nd marker?
There really isn't one. So officially, this is an optional rule. We do play with it locally here in Central Ohio, where you can keep the units off map and just move the formation marker on the map. That helps with Fog of War a little bit. It gives you a little more flexibility with Fog of War. The bigger use for the formation units is, or for the formation marker, I should say, is to show whether the unit is fueled or not, because you would flip it to its rear side to show that it's fueled, like we did right here for the 2nd Armored Division, right? But 82nd Airborne is not a unit that needs to be fueled, so there's no real reason to have it there. I would just keep it with the unit if you aren't doing something else with it. That's my advice. Otherwise, I don't think it really matters.
Anybody want to move the Rangers?
I'll move the Rangers.
All right. Anybody that's not signed in as observer, go ahead and retire and sign back in as and pick a new side as observer. That way, we don't have to worry about it.
So there's 3 Rangers.
Yep.
total, right?
There's the one in hex number 2513. That's the 3rd Ranger Battalion. And then there were 2 Ranger battalions in the big hex northeast of Agrigento with the HQ in it. So if you don't know, to expand the stack in Vassal, I'm going to double-click on that stack with the HQ in it, and then it will kind of diagonally spread the stack out, and I can highlight individual units in that stack. And I guess we're going to flip the nationality of this airbase as well.
Okay, so I'm going to move the top ranger.
Okay.
They get kind of a nice move mode for a leg unit, but
Yeah, so the rule of thumb on this is that the move mode has make sure it's on the right side, because I may have flipped it.
no, I put it back in combat because I want to move it up to adjacent to that town. I was just seeing on the move because it has actually 6 on leg move for the other one. So
Yeah. So the general rule of thumb is it's about twice on the higher side. So the move is about twice what it is on the combat mode side, and the combat strength is about twice what it is on the move mode side. That can be completely different if the movement type is different, for example. It also tends to be different with Soviet units, which tend to have kind of garbage movement. Soviet leg units tend to have fairly crappy movement rates. So you'll very often see like a combat mode movement allowance of 2 and a move mode movement allowance of 3. That's really pretty common in several OCS games with Soviets. So go ahead and move the rest of the Rangers as well.
Oh, one thing that this first Ranger should be in move mode now, right?
No, he started
3.5 movement points away.
was it 3.5 or 3?
Hold on.
They were
'Cause I
here.
counted 3 when I moved it.
So
you go
Lair,
one.
hold on. He starts
Yeah.
here. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
that's actually true, but I don't think you miscounted. But you got to be careful in on this particular map, because the roads are super windy, and they may not be traveling exactly along the path that you think, and you do need to follow the road.
Yeah, I can see that down at the bottom.
So if you wanted to flank that unit, you would have to go into move mode. Go over southwest of it. 2216. Why are the Rangers going that way?
Why not?
Isn't that where we're going to send our big giant infantry division?
It's
I should bypass them later. They can move around to the sides later. Because there's no way they can reach that combat this turn, even in move mode. So
It's also probably where the 2nd Armored Division is going too.
So you're ramming everything up that one road. You should put something on that trail that goes to 2815.
yeah, but the trail is 1 movement per. It's until you get close. If you're going to go onto the movement trails, you're never making it 3 turns up there.
Well, so you're not gonna the Rangers are not gonna be your leading elements of that thrust, though.
No, but they can support. So
they can, but they're going to be left
They're
relatively
flanking you.
far behind the. Okay, so let me explain what's going to happen with the 2nd Armored Division. All right. So in the movement phase, and it's got, even in movement mode, just looking at the factors here, it's going to have 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 25 combat strength. Okay, that's a good amount, right? In the movement phase, I put him in reserve and moved him 1/4 of his movement allowance. In the exploit phase, when I can also conduct overruns, I can then move him his full movement allowance. So putting him in reserve mode in movement is a way to get a few extra movement points out of that unit. So what you have here, let's just kind of talk our way through the tactical situation here. Bearing in mind that we're kind of trying harder to teach rules than we are to teach tactics as such, but let's kind of talk our way through it. So along this road, we're going to call it the Prizzi Road, because it's the road through Prizzi, and Corleone, no less. You've got this Italian mixed battalion, okay? That's one of the better Italian units in this. Well, in fact, it's one of the best. It's the best. It tied for the best Italian unit in the scenario, okay? So it's a 236. So it does not have high combat power, but it's got a pretty good action rating, all right? If you're going to attack that in the combat phase, then maybe you want Rangers up there with their relatively high action ratings to help lead that assault, okay? And that in that case, you're not counting on the Rangers for their combat strength so much, but for their action rating, all right? A 2 advantage action rating is significant. That's a significant... We'll look at the math on the surprise roll, but it's a significant modifier to that roll, okay? On an overrun, a +2 means that if you roll an average roll, you will get surprise. You'll get attacker surprise. You roll a 7, +2 is a 9, is attacker surprise on an overrun. On a regular combat, you got to roll 10 because it's easier to ambush the attacker, but it's also easier for the attacker to surprise the defender, okay? But that's in the combat phase. You're not going to be able to overrun... You're not going to have the movement points left to overrun these guys in Prizzi, all right? So you're probably going to hit it either with the big infantry division or with the 2nd Armored. And if you're going to do it that way, then my suggestion is actually to hit it with the big infantry division in move mode. Because you're going to have quite a bit of combat strength. You're not going to get the action rating benefit of having the Rangers with you, but you weren't going to do that in an overrun anyway. So you kind of got to count on the fact that you're rolling 5-1 in what's probably close to rain, which is not terrible odds, but it's not a great attack either. But it gives you options. So I guess in that context, what I would probably do is I would probably move the Rangers up adjacent to Prizzi, in case they have to lead an attack during the combat phase. You're not going to be able to get them much farther than that on this turn, right?
No, and I wasn't planning to. I figured the big guys would go through, and then Rangers would follow up and block the eastern units as they try to move into Palermo. So, but even in movement, if I switch to movement phase, I'd get it adjacent, but the action rating then would help the other ones when they move up. But if they do an overrun, it wouldn't count because they weren't in the same stack, right?
Right. So you can't overrun with them because you don't have enough movement to get to them and overrun. And you would have needed to attack, overrun with multiple units. They need to start their movement together. Okay. And you just don't have the movement to do it. You do have the action rating, but you don't have the movement. So what I'm saying is you can't guarantee that you're going to be able to overrun that unit with the 3rd Infantry Division, right? So it's probably not a bad idea I'm going to retreat. Let's just do this.
That lead Ranger unit.
Let's do this, okay? We're going to retreat that back.
I'm going to put this Ranger unit over on the other side of Prizzi.
Okay. Hold on a second. I'm just doing the undo thing here. Give me a second.
Whoa. Sorry.
It looks like... all right, so this guy started... One second. This guy started in here. Okay. And this guy started, I think... He started right here. All right, so let's think about this. I'm going to put these guys in move mode, okay? Because he's going to need the movement factors. So he's going to go 1, 2, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. Okay, so that gives him a flank on Prizzi. He's in move mode, so he's not going to throw his zone of control, and that can be important for retreat purposes. Okay, but he blocks the hex, right? And this Italian rando mixed battalion does not have the combat strength to get him out of that. All right. So here's what I think we do next. Is move the infantry division. All right. So we're going to move mode the infantry division. We have fueled from the HQ, so we don't have to worry about that. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5. It's going to cost. Let's look at let's look at the terrain effects chart. That's the medium brown, so that's rough. Terrain effects chart here says rough costs 3, costs 5 for truck movement to enter. So we actually can't do that because it's more than 3, so we cannot overrun into that hex with truck movement. So maybe that means the smart money is to not bother with the reserve movement trick on second armored. But I say let's move him back 3.5 and let's see what happens. 1, 2, 3.5. Okay, so they start back here. So let's just do the overrun this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to be 8 plus 3. All right. And for track movement into rough, it costs 3. So I can legitimately overrun. Now, I'm not going to get the armor bonus, and I'm going to have to pay kind of a lot of supply because it's a lot of units. We're not going to attack with the artillery or obviously the truck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units. So we're going to need to pay 9 tokens. Now you can, if you wish, only attack with part of this if you want, but and this is why I keep the extra supply points around. All right, so we're going to pay 9 tokens for this overrun. All right, this is a regular Italian unit. I do at least want to get through a combat here, too. Now, this is a regular Italian unit, so we don't have to roll for mysterious Italian surrender. I'm going to pull up the combat chart, and I'm going to roll for supply. We can designate whatever unit we would like from the attackers to be the lead AR unit. I'm going to designate one of the AR-4 tank battalions. So we have 25. So we've got 12.5 to 1 in close terrain. Let's see if it's very close. Rough is just close terrain. So we'll say with the combat, we'll talk about what all this means. We're going to say we have a 25 to 2, or 12.5 to 1, or 13 to 1 in close, up 1 for the action rating. Okay? So let's roll the surprise, and I'm going to roll 2d6. And I've rolled a 7. We're up 1, so it's 8. 8 is not a surprise. All right, so there is no surprise. Now, let's say we had rolled a 10 total, and we say there is surprise. Then we roll an additional d6, and we shift the odds in our favor that many columns. Or, if I'd rolled really low, let's say I'd rolled Snake Eyes, plus 1 is a 3. That's Defender surprise. Then I roll a d6, and it's shifted that many columns in the Defender's favor. So it's risky, especially it's always risky to attack, right? You never can completely predict what's going to happen. I am infamous for rolling friggin' Defender surprise, even when I'm like it up to. So let me tell you, so I mean that is a thing that could totally happen. But the point is that you can't always count on the combat results turning out the way you expected them to, right? So this combined with Fog of War kind of creates a situation where combats are somewhat unpredictable. So, but we do have a pretty good odds on this thing, and we do still get a +1 on the combat roll for being up 1 on action rating. So end close, I'm going to pull up the combat table, and again, this is under the OCS 4.3 charts on the combat tab. In close, there is a 12-to-1 column. We're at 13-to-1, but there is no 13-to-1 column, so it goes back down to 12-to-1. Okay, this is a very good attack, and yeah, I'm aware that we're spending more supply than we probably need to here, but it's also true that this is a critical attack, right? We want to try to do everything we can to make sure this doesn't get flubbed. So I'm going to roll a 2d6, again, for the combat result. We have no surprise. And I roll a 6, which is typical combat roll for me. And it's +1, so it's a 7. So we cross-reference our 12-to-1 in close to combat roll a 7, and we get the combat result says A01, E4, DL 102. So here's what that means. Attacker option 1, exploit 4. Defender loss 1, option 2. All right. Exploit does not apply here because we're in the movement phase. You cannot get exploited in the movement phase. Hopefully we'll get to that, but we don't need to worry about it right now. So the first thing that has so then all we have is attacker options and defender losses. The attacker, the first thing that happens is the defender loss. Okay, so the defender loses his 1. So he goes to the dead pile. And because it was an overrun, the attacker always moves into that hex. And in fact, he has already paid for that hex. Okay. The next thing that has to happen is the options. The defender has no units left, but the attacker must declare first whether they're going to take the option as a retreat or a loss. All right. In this case, you kind of have to take it as a loss. You don't have to. You can decide, I'm going to take it as a retreat, which what that looks like is this unit moved into that hex for the attack, but then it retreated, and then it's done. And that's why we don't want to take it as a retreat here. We want to take it as a loss. So we got to take one of our our lead action rating units. So one of these action rating 4 guys has to take the first loss. So we send him to the dead pile. Okay. And we're in that hex having spent 11 movement points. Okay. Now we have to roll for dump capture. And it's, 2T? It's 2T. So let's roll a D6. We've rolled a 3. That's 25%. 25% would go down to half a T, which would round up to a T, so we'll save a T out of that. So we've captured a token, so decrease, and we'll flip it to change side. So we've captured a valuable supply token, but the defender actually had to spend combat supply too, and it's one token for up to 2 defending units to defender supply, and we should have actually spent that before the combat like I did with the attacker. That is a habit. That's habit right there is why I did that, because I'm normally not worried about the supply for both sides, right? So we're actually rolling. There's actually only 1 T here because the defender had to spend it for combat supply. Or they didn't have to. They could choose to fight without it, but there's no reason for them to do that. So our 25% of 1 T goes down to a quarter T, which turns into nothing because it rounds down to 0. All right, so 11 points. Now we're going to go 12, 13, 14. All right. And then second armor division is done for the turn. Now let's move up.
Close.
Go ahead.
So I almost blocked the road.
Yeah, well, but we can now block the road and watch, because now the road's clear and I don't have to blow 3 movement points to overrun that unit anymore. And that's kind of what I was trying to get around with the second armored. I was trying to get the infantry to do it, but I hadn't at that point checked whether the truck move mode infantry division could actually overrun in rough terrain, and they can't. So this one's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. So question is, does this infantry unit go its, what did I say, 11?
No.
Let me count it again. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14.
Would that Italian cavalry unit impinged a Zoc there in 22-21?
So that's a problem. Yeah, it does. And because this is truck movement, it was actually going to get stopped up here at Palermo, even if it didn't get stopped here. The Italian unit, so attack-capable combat units on their combat sides exert a zone of control. This is not important for movement, except for truck movement and retreats. Okay? So what this means is that this unit, without a screening unit of some kind to put in that hex, which we technically have because we could use the artillery unit for that, but we would basically be we'd almost have to sacrifice. We'd run the risk of sacrificing the artillery unit because it's only got a 1 combat strength. Okay. So otherwise, this infantry division is going to move here, and it's going to have to stop because it's going to hit a Zoc, and there isn't another unit in that hex to screen. All right. And if a unit screens in that way, it has to stay in that hex for the rest of the movement phase too. And there's really what's that?
No unit in the second armor that could hang back and be.
No, that's not true.
Like a unit that didn't make a difference.
These units had 2 extra movement points. So they actually absolutely can. I can drop the rest of second armored here at 14 movement points, move these guys up into that hex, and then and then they're done. And then I have, this is 11 right here. So I can move through this. Now, when I get up here, however, I'm going to hit the same problem. Okay. So that's 14, 14 and a half, 15, 16. Okay. So this is 11, 12, 12 and a half. That's as far as he can go. Without another screening unit, which he does not. That's not true. Now, of course, you're supposed to do this in order, right? So that can put him right here. Which, let this be a lesson is the necessity of planning and timing this stuff out. So you kind of got to know, hey, I'm going to drive second armored up the road. And this is where it really helps to kind of dry run some of these things too. I'm going to run this guy up the road. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's, if that succeeds, here's where he's going to end up. What do I want to do next? And how do I have to position the remaining units that have a couple movement points left to support that? Okay. And these are the 3 hexes that you'd have to block to get this guy all 14 truck movement points adjacent to Palermo. Okay. Which is defended by a grand total of 4, by the way. And one of which is a coastal defense unit, which might evaporate. So this is the introductory scenario, right, for Sicily too. And this is why this will show you how that works. And you got 3 turns to do it. But, all right, so what I think we have seen here is all of the basic stuff. So I'm going to let anybody ask any questions that they want to ask, and then I'm going to reset the pieces.
Rather than taking Palermo.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, go back up there. So can we go to an Italian counter and reset? Do it again.
Let me check something. Because there is a counterattack
'Cause I think-
scenario.
I'm
All right.
thinking you have to move the Corps headquarters up the main road, or can it throw supply all the way to Palermo?
Let's find out. I suspect that it can't, but I don't know that. But it might be able to. So it's going to go 1/2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I can trace through that because the hexes are occupied. 12, 13. So, yes, it can absolutely trace. But let's say if I have an Italian combat unit, let's look at terrain effects. So low hills for leg and hills is 1. If I can get this unit here, this unit would block would project a Zoc into this hex and would cut the supply for those 3 units. And that would be an issue. Now, can that unit actually get to that hex? I'm not sure that it can.
Cavalry unit can.
Not in combat mode. So this is going to be 2, 3. Actually, that's sufficient, isn't it? Doesn't need to get to this hex. It only needs to get to this hex.
That's what I was thinking. One of the screening units. I want to take Palermo in the first turn.
Mm-hmm.
Want to cut it off and then take it.
So that's
Defended by
a good catch. And so maybe what you're trying to do then is position. I'm not sure you have the stuff to do this, but position stuff to either block this cavalry unit or combat it in the combat phase and knock it out. It's not a very good unit, right? But on the other hand, at this point, you have isolated Palermo. You don't want to be dependent on... Well, here's another thing you could do, though. Okay, you have supply on trucks. So I'd say you're out of position here to block this cavalry unit. The cavalry unit could block the zone of control. But where it is during the Allied movement phase, all of the hexes are screened that we would have to move trucks through. So what we do instead is let me pull the units out. We take our 2 trucks, which are loaded with supply, and we drive them up here, and we park them under the infantry division for maximum protection. And then, worst case, those units eat off the map. Because you have enough supply. As the Allies, you start with about 8 supply points here on the first turn. You have enough supply points to do that with.
Actually, yeah. In the combat phase, which happens next, you can try and take Palermo from that coast defense unit.
You could, yeah. Well, here's another thing, though. We have air that we can do. All right. Now we've got to roll for these air units, so let's do that. I'm gonna find the air table, and it's 2d6. We roll for each one, so they'll rebase. So first one we rolled an 8, so it does not take a loss. Second one we roll a 7, it doesn't take a loss. And the third one we roll a 7. So none of these take losses, but they all have to rebase somewhere. And they're all going to go down. Whoops. Okay. And this is now an Allied air base. All right. So What that means is if you've got supply transport, you can now fly supply into this hex if you have supply transport, okay? Which we don't right here, but if we're playing the campaign, then we would have supply transport that we could then just fly into this airbase. We don't have to make rolls or anything to make sure it lands. It's an allied controlled airbase. They just land, okay? So even in our worst case scenario where these units get cut off, we have both enough to feed everything on the map and probably enough to conduct an attack next turn as well if we need to, okay? Going back to the HQ, if we flip the HQ, we're going to see that its throw range goes down to 9. That can be a potential problem, as we're aware, because first of all, the 9th Infantry Division might end up being out of supply. So we have to, bear that in mind. But we could also move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Somebody just clicked somewhere. So let's say we move the 9th, the HQ up to Corleone. Okay. Can we still trace to 9th Infantry? I think we might be able to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Maybe not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
So we should have
6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, watch this. What's that?
So we should have rammed the 9th Infantry up that road.
Maybe, but you got two infantry. You got 2 infantry divisions, right? You probably don't need to send them up the same road.
No, up this other road. The road to... No.
The road to Marsala, or the
He had
road...
what- he had-
or
he
the
had
road
what?
to...
He only used the left.
I thought he used all
This
4.
is where
I could be wrong, but I thought he used all 14. Remember, he did an overrun in there, too. So if you're counting it now and only getting 11, then that's about right.
he was... Let's see.
He came in at Porto Empedocle. So, 1, 2, 3. This is where, no, right back here is where the combat took place. So this is going to be 1, 2, 2.5, 5.5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He actually only moved 11.5. So if we move him up here, he can absolutely get thrown supply by this HQ. Oh, wait. Let me check something. We got to check track movement cost for truck movement type. It might be 1. It is 1. But on, like, if it was mud weather, which we don't have in this game, that could be completely different. Although you don't use the mud modifiers to trace supply. So that's true.
How many points does he have left at this point?
This is 12.5 right here. So you could probably get all the way up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
No, you wouldn't
7,
want to
8.
go there, though. You want to go up
No,
the
no.
main road.
Yeah, I didn't move him there. So this is 12, 13, 14. So if we put the HQ in Corleone, we can trace 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we can absolutely throw to him, but we run the risk of him getting cut off, right? But we can also trace 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 behind him. So you'd have to cut him off. They'd have to cut him off here, basically. Which is 1, which you could do with 1. You could not do it with this Italian unit. Now there
That's
is...
one of only 2.
Yeah, just check something here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I don't see anything the Italians could cut him off with if he's in that hex. He can't get all the way up adjacent to Castellamare del Golfo. He doesn't have enough movement to do that. So I think if you want to advance him to his maximum safe advance, you put him where he is right now. Because there's two possible ways that the HQ can throw to him from there. And you do want to trace... you got to be concerned about where the HQ is going to trace from, too. So the HQ, in this case, needs to trace from a port or from this allied supply source hex. Okay? And in this case... let's see. We can't really go one, and we could go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Remember, we trace back to the supply source. The headquarters throw forward. So this will go 1, 2, 3, 4. Somebody keeps clicking on random stuff in random parts of the map. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is as far forward as he can go and still draw from this supply source hex. Okay. And I think he can still draw from the port, so let's try that. And that's going to be 1, 2, 3. So you can go 1, 2. So this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 adjacent. So this is as far forward as the HQ can go and still throw and still draw supply from one of the supply sources, which I think what that means is that the HQ stays put, because he can throw to everybody already. Let's run him up this road, but it should be okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, 13. So in that case, I think this guy goes 1 hex forward to block this road. And from where he's at, this is the kind of stuff that, this is where, this kind of situation is where knowing the map, meaning having played on the map before, really gives you a big advantage. And knowing, just saying, okay, we're going to start at, Gala, for example. Here's what HQ's coming in. Here's what its throw range is. So I have a sense of how many hexes forward I can throw. Right. All right. I am going to reset this, and I'm going to pull up a different scenario. So, and I think it won't throw anybody out of the room. I'm going to throw the Gala counterattack scenario up. Okay, and this is going to look a little different. This is the Americans have just landed, and it's the Axis turn. And we have a couple of relatively strong Axis formations here that we can do stuff with. So what's the available space is the space between these lines. Okay, and here's your Axis supply source. So HQs have to trace to this hex. And 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to say you can trace. You can run your trace over the boundaries. I think that's completely fair. And it looks like we got a train busting here as well that was dropped by the Allies. So the Germans are going to counterattack here. And what do they have to work with? You've got an Italian HQ, which in this case can throw to German units. You've got the Hermann Goering Panzer Division, which at this point is a relatively powerful formation. You've got a company of what looks like Tigers. And you've got the Livorno Division, which is one of the better Italian infantry divisions to work with. So, trying to pick from the folks who didn't get to move any units during the other setup, who would like to move some Germans this time around? Okay, so we've decided that the weather is, as set by the scenario, is clear. We know who the first player is. The first player is the Axis. So they will take the first turn, and we will start the first player turn. We're going to, again, let's bring in some air. Of course, we don't have any. Do we have an air base here? We don't have an air base. I guess we're ignoring air. All right, so there's no air. All right, so what do we got to work with here then? Another thing that is in this game that's not in a lot of other OCS games is naval. You can barrage with naval. So, but that actually can happen during the reaction phase too, actually. So the reaction phase is one in which the opponent, the non-phasing player, can actually act with things that can act in reaction, which include air and naval, and which also include anything that is in reserve mode. Okay. So what do the Allies have to work with here? They've got a big infantry division sitting on the beach. What are the victory conditions for this scenario? .4007. Let me grab those KTX markers. 4007. 4305. Okay. So the Axis victory condition is, and the turn. How long does this last? This lasts 1/2 a turn, so it's a solitaire affair really, unless the Allies can react, and really all they have to react with are the cruisers. So these are the two victory hexes. If the Axis controls this hex, then they win at the end. And you can see that there's two Ranger battalions there that are fairly good. All right. So does anybody want to volunteer to move stuff? And I can advise. All right, so let's see. What's that?
Said don't speak all at once.
Yeah, exactly. At least you're not timing out my headset again, so that's good. All right, so the scenario victory conditions also say you can either occupy Gala or Gala and this other hex, but I don't see this hex doesn't give you victory if you occupy it. If you occupy it and don't get Gala, so. The way I interpret that victory condition is that this is the hex that you need to go for. So basically what I think you're going to do is you're going to move Livorno down, which is going to need to go into move mode, which means you're going to need to spend a token. All right, so I'm going to hit clone here. We're going to drop this, decreases Control Z. Okay, so we're going to spend a token to put Livorno in move mode. We can't get here to Gala. We only got 1/2 a turn to do this, so we're going to go here. And I believe that this as an overrun would be absolutely stupid, so we're not going to do that. And then we're going to move HG, which I think we're going to just fuel as its own piece. Because that makes sense. And then this Tiger Battalion, which you'll notice is an action rate, or company, which is an action rating 5, will fuel that as an independent as well and just move everything down. So I think what this scenario looks like is that's your movement phase, and then we go through the combat phase. Because there's, I don't think, now this, does this have, let me back that up. All right. So looking at the movement, we have 1, 2, 3, 2.5 to get to Gala. Okay, so that means that we need 5.5 movement points to go in looking to do an overrun. All right. So breaking this stack up, we're going to have to, this unit's going to just stay behind with the supply because it's defense. That parentheses around the combat strength means it's defense only, so it's useless here. We're going to have to put this guy in move mode. We're going to have to put this guy in move mode, and we're going to have to put the Tiger in move mode. But we want the Tiger for its action rating, not for its combat strength necessarily. Okay. Everything else has enough that we can go down here and try to overrun these Rangers. All right. So what that looks like, oh, we're going to have to put the artillery in move mode as well. Do we have any other artillery? No, we don't. Okay. Well, that's fine. All right. So let's try it as an overrun. We have 1, 5, 6, 10, 13 points. 13 to 6. The action rating is even. We're going to lead with the Tigers. The Rangers are going to lead with the Rangers. Now, that's a choice you can make as the attacker or defender, right? But in this case, it's an overrun. I would use the 5s in either case, okay, as either the defender or the attacker. It is a choice. You could choose to defend as the lead, with the lead action rating unit being a lower action rating unit if you want. I don't think that's a good idea here. Anybody have a question? Or was that just...
Yeah, is... Name strength is 6.
The defender strength is 6,
Attacking with...
Let's add it up again. So I got 5, 9, 10, 14, 15. Right? Am I adding that right?
Three. We have 3 spare strength points, right?
Spare strength points.
Strength points. We don't need them for the attack. So can we use them to...
Well, hold on, though.
Come on.
So in OCS, you use standard...
Never mind.
Mathematical rounding, which is atypical. So normally you would just round the odds down in the defense. It might make a difference here. Normally you would just round in a different war game. You might just round the odds down in the defender's favor. That's very typical. In OCS, you round mathematically. 15 to 6 is 2.5 to 1, which rounds up to 3 to 1. All right. Now Gela is
my question.
Looking at the. You might be right. Hold on though. Is that a city or a village? I think it's a village. It's a village. Okay, which is probably close terrain. Let's look at that. Village is close terrain. All right, so we're looking at 3 to 1 in close, and if we look at the combat charts. Is there a 3 to 1 column under close? And there is. If it goes from 2 to 1 directly to 4 to 1, then you're right. It's not worth spending the extra 3 points because it doesn't change anything. But in this case, it does. It gives us a column. All right. So we spend the, what is it going to be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tokens, which is kind of a lot. Whoops. But we don't have to really worry about it either because we have enough supply for what we need to accomplish here. So, yes, in a campaign, you might want to make a calculation like that. In this case, we don't need to because we have enough supply to attack in both the combat phase and in the movement phase. So we're just going to roll our 3 to 1 even combat roll for this attack. It's an overrun, remember, so it's easier to surprise. So for surprise, we get a 7, which is no surprise. So there is no surprise. Now, the action rating turns into a DRM on the combat roll too, but the action rating is equal. So we got a 3-to-1 in close. This is not a super favorable combat. And we got a 5. So 3-to-1 with a 5 is an AL1 DO1. All right. So the attacker loses a step, and it has to be from the lead unit. So it has to be that. Now, and this may have been a situation in which maybe it was a good idea to move a unit into this hex that throws a Zoc, but that unit does not throw a Zoc. What did I say?
One of your 8.
Give me a second here.
With that unit.
AL101. Okay, so we had an AL101, so we have to take an option, but we could take the second loss from whoever we like. So we'll take it from the infantry. Okay. What was your thing?
Oh, yeah, I guess you could put a little battle group in front of the Corps headquarters.
And then we have a DO1, which is a defender option. So the option, now the defender if the attacker elects to not take their option as a loss, they take it as a retreat. Then what happens is the defender retreats a hex, or the attacker retreats a hex, and the combat's over. And their movement is over, but they don't have enough movement to overrun again anyway. If they had enough movement to overrun again, they actually could overrun again. But in this case, the attacker took their option as a loss. So the defender has to take their option. The defender does not have to take their option if the attacker retreats. So the defender can... so the question is, does the attacker take their loss as their option as retreat or as a loss? So they'd lose one step, and it would have to be the 5 AR Ranger because they led with that. Or they can retreat, but retreating in this situation costs them the scenario. And here's why. Because you have to retreat the whole stack, right? So if you lose the step, then the Americans are still there. If they retreat, then here's what happens. We're in the movement phase. The Americans retreat here. We run this guy up here, and all of a sudden, the Germans win. Because remember, it's only half a turn scenario. The Americans will not get an actual turn to counterattack that. So, the Americans have to stay put. Which means that they have to take the loss, which means that they lose the AR-5 Rangers. All right? Is there any other stuff that the Axis wants to do on their turn? I think they move the trucks up under Livorno just to have the supply close at hand. But other than that, they really can't block a retreat hex because the only retreat hex would be this hex that's occupied by American units already. And these guys can't... looks like somebody's getting some static.
The Kramer division. Move up the Kramer division, though, too, don't you?
That's a good point. I forgot all about those. That's comp group of Kramer.
Division. All those units.
Yeah. All right, so let's fuel them, first of all. So let's reduce that. Pull that out. And we need to flip that. We need to flip that, that. Wow, okay. So I can see why we're using these guys. Watch this. All right, so what do we got here for movement? We have 4... I got it. I missed one. Oh, no, I didn't miss one. Looks like that guy's getting left behind. All right, assuming we can't move off the map, I'm going to move on the map. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Okay. And that's here as well. Can this guy reach back? I've ignored this interdict marker. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, he can. This HQ can reach back to that supply. All right, so movement is done. I don't think there's any point in attacking with Kramer. Kramer's there for barrage, which we're going to do. So in the combat phase, we're going to be done with movement, okay? And there's no air in the scenario, so we're ignoring that as well. At the end of the movement phase, we would conduct air and naval barrages. So I think, actually, what we're going to do is with the U.S. units, we're going to throw... barrages down. We'll hit Livorno with the 12-point destroyers and HG with the 18-point cruisers. So let's get the barrage table out. This happens in the reaction phase. We don't pay supply for air or naval barrages except indirectly. And we have to refit air units. Any barrages that we fire with artillery units need to be paid for with supply on the map. Okay. So let's hit the, 12 points against Livorno. So I'm going to roll 2d6, and I'm going to roll 3d6. So I got a 4, 1, 2. So the 4 and the 1 is 5 on 12 points. Livorno is not overstacked because it's only 3 REs. And remember, the trucks don't count, so that is a whiff on the barrage from there. The cruisers will throw 18 on HG. Now, here's a trick. A single unit never counts as more than 3 REs for barrage purposes. So if we look at the amount of stuff that's in the hex, we've got 1 regiment, 1, 2, 3, 4 battalions. So there's actually only 3 REs in the hex. But if we hadn't taken 2 losses, there would be more than 3 REs in the hex, and there would be a positive column shift on the barrage, making the barrage more effective. But this does not apply to stacking, only for barrage. But for barrage purposes, any individual single unit, whether it's a multi-unit formation or a single division that happens to have 4 steps and therefore 4 REs in it, only counts as 3 REs. So there is no shift up. There was actually a shift down on Livorno for the hills, the low hills, because that's close terrain, but that missed anyway. HG is in the open. And there is no shift for what we call density. So let's roll against the 18. That's a 4. That is also a whiff. Now, I rolled the 3rd die because if I get one of these 1/2 results, and that's what we call a kicker, and if that kicker die is a 4, 5, or 6 on a 1/2 result, then we do a step loss. But that doesn't happen here either. So the Allied complete opportunity for reaction is over. And then we have the combat phase. Now we're going to start the combat phase properly with the barrage segment. Now this is artillery barrage during the combat phase. And we do have artillery. And we can combine these into one big barrage. So we have 6 points with HG. We have 28 points. So for a total of 34 points, does that make a difference? It doesn't matter. Adding HG's artillery into it doesn't matter. It's still on the same 25 to 50 column. That's going to cost 4 T or 1 supply point, which will be thrown by the HQ. All right. That's weird. So we have a 25 to, and all right, so it's going to be close terrain, so it's down a column, and it's going to be half an RE, so less than one RE or less is down another column, so it's going to be 28 factors. I think it's 28 or 26, same difference, it's the same column. down 2. So we're going to roll on the 25 column, but it's actually going to be on the 12 to 16 column. And we've rolled another 5, which on the 12 to 16 column is no dice. So all the artillery is having a bad day today. And again, we shifted down 2 columns. 1 column was for density because there's hardly any guys in the hex because it's just a ranger battalion. And the other is for terrain because it is a village. Okay. All right. Now we have the actual combat. And here's what happens, though, if we've seen how the combat works. So let's assume I rolled a 7 and we got the DG status. I'm going to put a DG marker on him. So what the DG marker does is it halves his movement and combat allowances, and it's a -1 to his RE, his action rating. Okay, which means that instead of a 3-4-3, it's a 1.5, 3, 1.5. All right. So we're going to attack with basically everything here. So if we attack with Livorno, it's going to be 7. If we attack, and that's going to cost 3 tokens, by the way, because it's 3 steps. We attack with HG, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 tokens, and 5 plus 7 is 12 factors. And we're going to attack with Kramer because why not? But Kramer's coming across the river and will be halved. So we're actually only going to attack with 4 units here. And it's going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, halves to 4. Okay, so that's 7 plus 12 plus 4 is 19 equals 23 attack factors versus 1.5. And that is going to cost us a total of 11 tokens, or 2 full supply points, which will take 1 from here. One from here, and then there's going to be another 1T left. So that's a very expensive attack. But again, based on the scenario victory conditions, it's the way this scenario is going to play out unless you successfully overrun the hex during the movement phase. All right, so we have 23 divided by 1.5 in close. That's 15 to 1 in close. So looking at the combat table, there is a 15 to 1 column. So it's 15 and a third, so that rounds down to 15. And we are up 1. Is that correct? No. We're a 3. Do I have a... Hold on. Do I have any 5s in here? I don't think I do. I do. There is a Panzer Battalion with Kramer. That will be the lead unit. Now, I'm attacking from 3 hexes, which means that I can never get exploit on this result, but who cares in this particular case? All right, so we do have a AR5 versus AR3, so that is a +2. So we're at 15 to 1, in close, up 2. So I'm going to roll for surprise. 3 plus 2 is a 5, which is Defender Surprise, okay? So let's roll 1d6. We've rolled a 4, which means it's down 4 columns. So 4 columns in the Defender's favor. I told you that I was especially gifted in rolling Defender Surprise, and here it is. So we're down 4 columns, which means this goes down to the 6 to 1 column. Now we roll the combat roll. And we've rolled a 9, and we still get the +2 for action rating differential, so that's an 11. So on the 6 to 1, we got an 11, which is an AE4, which we don't qualify for because we're attacking from 3 hexes, and a DL102. So that's Defender Loss, that's Attacker Exploit 4, which means that any attacking units with an action rating of 4 or better earn Exploit Mode. Okay, and then they retain that exploit mode until the exploit phase, which is the next phase. But we don't get that here. And we do a DL10, did I say 02? I did say DL102, which means Defender loses 1 step and has 2 options. So, Defender's going to lose the step, so they're going to lose the hex. And then attackers can advance after combat into the hex, which will be the end of this scenario. But let's say we got just an option. And the unit's DG'd. If a DG'd unit retreats into a zone of control, an enemy zone of control, then it takes an additional step loss. However, Kramer here is all in move mode, so he is not throwing a zone of control. So if there was a possibility for retreat, the Rangers could retreat and not suffer an additional step loss, even though they're already DG'd. And then after they retreat, they become DG'd. But they don't suffer, if they didn't start the retreat DG'd, then they don't suffer the additional step loss. If that makes any sense. This is a point on which many OCS players get confused, is exactly what that means for retreat purposes. So, what we end up with here is, say, Livorno advances. We'll let the Italians march in glorious victory into the streets of Gela. But that's the end of this half-turn scenario, which, again, is more of an instructional scenario. The Primasol Bridge scenario is another one of the early scenarios, and that takes place over here, where the British need to take, basically, this bridge right here on their way to Syracuse. No, I'm wrong. It's on this bridge here on the way to Catania. And that's a relatively interesting but also super compact scenario. The initial turns, even the one-turn scenario for Smolensk is not quite this compact. There's quite a bit more on the map. One of the characteristics of Sicily 2 specifically is that there's not that much to move. There's not that many units. I'm going to pull up. I'm going to retire this, however, and load the campaign so we can take a look at that. Okay. So we're going to see that, first of all the Allied stuff starts as floating vortices, so you actually have to conduct the amphibious landings. You have a great deal of air to play with, which I think I want to talk about some in a minute here. And then you have quite a lot of Italian units. Now, a lot of these guys on the coast are these coastal divisions that may evaporate upon being sighted by the enemy. So that's a consideration. But the entire campaign has a fair number of units to move, but the individual scenarios do not. Let me talk briefly about air here, because there's some air techniques that I'd like to at least mention. So first, let me rotate these inexplicably rotated guys here. So there are a couple of different kinds of air units. There are transports that say TPT on them. There are fighters, which are generally speaking meant to be fighters, although some of them have barrage capability as well. There are tactical bombers like this A-20, which are intended to be used for ground support. There are strategic bombers like these B-24s, which have some significant limitations when used for ground support. And there are some hybrid aircraft too, but these are the main aircraft types, okay? So the numbers on the bottom of the planes. The first number, the number on the left, is the combat strength or air-to-air value, okay? So this A-36, for example, pull up this Spitfire instead because it's more obviously a fighter. The Spitfire has a 5 combat value, okay? And then it has a 1 ground support value. So it's not very good used as ground support, but if you're in a pinch, if you need to squeeze out an extra factor, you can do that. On the other hand, we have the strategic bomber, the B-17. It has a combat value of 3, but it's in parentheses. So it can't, what that means is it can't be used to attack, which means it can't be used as a fighter. But it's got a 17 tactical value, which is pretty good. And then the tactical planes that we have available here are A-20s, B-25s, B-26s, all of which have 6s for barrage strength. And that's what that is. It is a barrage strength. Now, strategic, there's a modifier for this. And it's not on the chart. This doesn't come up very often. Strategic bombers are penalized when they're used for ground support against units. They're intended to be used against facilities. So if, for example, I would like to... Probably all the... let's see here. All right, so I'll just throw some of these guys down on random air bases. There's a huge air base over here. So we've got this big stack of planes here. I can throw a mission of B-17s at that base to A, try to knock down the air base, and B, to try to kill the planes that are there. And that's way too many planes that are there. I think you can have... It doesn't come up often enough for me to remember it offhand. But you can have... I think twice the refit number of planes in a single airbase, but you can only refit the refit number of planes. So generally speaking, that's the number you want to keep there. So you'd want to keep 4 planes at these 2 air bases. Looking at the questions, does anybody in the voice chat have any questions?
No, you've been doing a good job.
Okay, so Stephen Roberts in the YouTube chat asks, can I use air assets to barrage in the reaction phase if they're active? Yes. There are game-specific rules that disallow you from doing that. For example, in case blue, Soviets may not use air reaction. Blanket may not use air reaction, as I recall the rule. It's been a while since I've looked at it. But game-specific rules aside, generally, if the planes are active, you may use them in reaction. Without them having to be in some... They don't get a reserve mode, for example. Only ground combat units go into reserve modes. Even, like, transport points cannot be in a reserve mode unless they are organic transport points. Let me mention that real quick. Let me find some trucks. This is a wagon. That's perfect. Okay. All right, let me resume my air discussion here. So there's a number of different air missions that can be flown by air units. And then once they've completed their mission, they generally become inactive. They return to base. Or they return to base and become inactive. All right, so if I fly this B-17 mission that I was just talking about, they'll go out to an enemy air base, bomb the crap out of it, and then they'll return and they'll be inactive wherever they are. Probably based off map. Well, all the Allied air is going to be based off map because they have no air bases on Sicily at this point, right? So, and actually, the Italians, I think there's a game-specific rule here that limits the Allies' ability to base air on the island, I think. Regular, to echo Joe Perez in the YouTube chat here, regular air barrages do happen after movement in the movement phase during the barrage segment. So you've got the breakouts in the movement phase. You've got the breakout segment where you do all your breakouts, which we're not going to explain here. It's something that comes up a lot in East Front games. It probably isn't going to come up in Sicily too, at least in the first couple of turns. Then you do all the mode movement. And then you do air barrages. However, hip shoots are a special type of air barrage that can be run in the movement segment of the movement phase. So, I'm in the middle of moving. Let's put a random situation together here. I've got this unit that's threatening Catania, okay? And this is the situation at the start of the German movement phase. And I've decided that I am going to use this stack to counterattack it. So what I can do is, during the movement phase, remember, in Sicily 2, this is always by game-specific rule. If there isn't a game-specific rule that says that you can hip shoot, then you cannot. I need to move a unit adjacent. Well, I have a unit adjacent to it in Catania, so I could just hip shoot it. So I can say if I want to overrun this, and if I don't want to overrun it, then there's really not much use in hip shooting it, because I can put a more powerful air mission together against it and just run it as a regular air barrage. But if I want to try and overrun this unit, then I need to DG it during the movement phase when I can overrun, right? And a whole division is probably a terrible example. But so I'm going to run this, and then I'm going to I'm going to fly this Ju-87 on a hip shoot mission. Only single planes. Hip shoot is a specific type of missions. Other missions include fighter sweeps. Another mission might include ground support. Another mission might include facility barrage. What is called train busting awkwardly is an interdiction mission. That's a type of mission, and they all work the same, but they all happen at a specific time in the turn. Okay. Barrages and fighter sweeps happen in the barrage segment of the movement phase. So if I want to conduct an air barrage on this unit because I've got a Allied Infantry division next to it. Okay. But right next to it is a fighter, which is going to give me a negative. Can intercept my air barrage, or it can provide a negative modifier because my air mission is going to be flown in the patrol zone. Now we search patrol zones. Oh, that didn't work. That's disappointing. It worked on the Allied units, but not on the Axis units for some reason. That's a 10 hex radius around the around an active fighter. Okay, there's an active fighter here. So if I'm going to run an air barrage mission on this thing, then I really want to knock that fighter down. So I'm going to send one of my own fighters on a fighter sweep mission. All right, so I'm going to say, okay, we're going to fighter sweep this, and we're going to do an air combat. Oops, we're going to do an air combat. So the air combat roll is super easy, and a lot of OCS rolls are like this. It's basically just a 2d6 roll. A 7, you both take a loss, or you're both down, and on higher than a 7, the defender is down. Lower than a 7, the attacker is down. And by down, I mean you're turned inactive. And then you have a 2 in 6 chance of getting a step loss. So the way this actually works is I'm going to say, okay, I am flying a fighter sweep. I, the Allied player, am flying a fighter sweep, and I'm going to face your BF-109. I have an air-to-air value of 5. You have an air-to-air value of 4. Therefore, the difference is 1. It's +1, which is 1 in my favor as the Allied attacker. Okay, so I'm going to roll 2d6. Okay, and I get a 7. The roll result is +1, so it's an 8, which means that the defender is down. Now I'm also going to roll an additional d6. If it's a 5 or 6, the down plane also takes a step loss. Okay, normally, again, playing with physical pieces, but I'll even do this in Vassal. I'll roll 2d6 plus 1d6, and I'll take the 2 first dice as the roll, the 2d6 roll, and the third die as the kicker die that tells me whether there's a step loss or not. So on 5, 5, 4, the defender plus 1, the defender would be down, but there's no step loss because it's not a 5 or a 6. So what we do, again, we said, okay, the defender was flying at this airbase. He goes under the airbase. Okay, and then this guy goes back home. Now, if there's multiple defending fighters, then this attacking fighter can keep fighter sweeping until either he gets knocked down himself, or if the defender decides, because they have to fight the first plane, they have to fight the top plane, but all the other planes can choose to just go down. So if you have, say, 3 planes here, one of them's a fighter and the other 2 are tactical bombers, you may well decide that you don't want to fight an air-to-air combat with the tactical bombers, and you just want to send them down so they're inactive. But then at least they're not going to get shot down, right? So there's that. Now I can bomb the airfield, and so let's do that. So, and sequencing is important here, right? Okay, so I've just done this. Now I'm going to bomb the airfield. So I'm going to roll 3 B-17s on an air mission. You can fly up to, generally speaking. Fighter sweeps are always one fighter at a time. Barrages can be multiple fighters. This would happen in the barrage segment, though. So during the barrage segment, we're done with movement. I know that there's enemy planes on this base, so I'm going to throw a 3-plane B-17 facility barrage against that airbase. So 17 plus 17 plus 17 is what? 51? That's a lot of factors. That is a lot of factors. However, unlike fighter sweeps, so I'm going to say, all right, boom, we're going to fly that mission. Unlike fighter sweeps, barrages are subject to flak. The flak rule is also very easy, and you don't normally need to memorize anything. Well, you do have to memorize it, but it's super easy. You roll 2 dice. If the roll is 11 or more, you get a hit. And the kicker die will determine which plane gets hit if it's a multi-plane affair. Now, you get a +1 to the roll for planes in the mission over 2. I'm flying 3 planes here, so that's a +1. If there's one of your air bases in the hex, you get a +1 per level of the air base. There's a level 1 air base, so it's a +2 to the die roll. So again, I'm going to roll 2d6 plus 1d6, and I get a 3 and a kicker, which the kicker doesn't mean anything because there was definitely no hit. But unless the total is 11 or more, don't worry about it. It's not a hit on flak. So now we take our 51 ridiculous factors, and I see this is not behaving, and we can roll on the barrage versus facility table. Okay, and here's the column we're going to go on. Now, there's a supply cost but only if we're doing this with actual artillery. So I'm going to roll on this column, and I'm going to roll a d6. Boom. We rolled a 6. Wow. Okay. I wish I could roll like that in person. All right. And we can see what the results are here. So we have a 2 asterisk 3 in parentheses. Okay. So what the 2 means is that the airbase is reduced by 2 levels. However, you cannot reduce the airbase level to lower than 1, and it's already a 1, so it cannot be reduced anymore. Then the asterisk means that train busting is successful, but this is not a train busting mission, so that's irrelevant. And then the 3 in parentheses means that now, for every plane in that airbase, whether it's active or not, that we have barraged, we have to roll a d6, and if we roll that number or higher, we have done a step loss to that plane. So there's this German fighter here. We're going to roll a d6. We rolled a 1, so he does not suffer step loss, and he just stays down. But let's say we roll a 4. It's over that number 3, so this guy takes a step loss, and he gets... Well, actually, that was a reduced plane. This was the reduced side, so this guy is actually dead. Okay? And then, now, once again, our B-17s go back home. Oops. And they're going to go over to, let's call it Malta, the inactive side of the Malta airfields, because they've now flown their mission. Now, let me mention range. And boy, that's super duper irrelevant for B-17s. The number in yellow is the range in hexes. The B-17's range is 286 hexes. So we don't really need to count that ever. However, what we can see here is that, you see these AEPs? You've also got, especially for the Italians in Sicily 2, or Sicily 1, I suppose, you've got all your air is off map. So how much does it cost? Hey, I just flew this mission to this airfield. How many movement points did that cost? Where do I count that from if I'm flying out of Tunisia? Well, you fly in, you start at one of these hexes, these AEP hexes, and this will tell you how many hexes away that is. So if I'm starting with Tunisia, if these guys are in Tunisia, then they are going to fly, this plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hexes. So that's 69 hexes. That's well within their ridiculous range. And then they can fly the same range back to base. Okay, so that is a one-way range. There is nothing that says that you have to rebase your planes at the same air base that they flew out of. So if I flew them out of Tunisia, there's nothing that says I can't land them in Malta. Okay. The only thing that maybe stops you from doing that is this refit number, right? I can only refit 8 planes in Malta, where in Tunisia I can refit 24. And the B-17s have a crazy range that makes the additional distance all the way back to Tunisia completely irrelevant. Yeah, it's 60 hexes back to Tunisia, but the B-17 has 280 range plus, so they can reach anywhere on this map from Tunisia with no difficulty whatsoever. There is another type of mission called a base transfer mission that fighters anybody can do it. If all I'm doing is moving the planes from one base to another in twice their range, okay? However, if fighters do it, if the range that they move is less than half their range, then they don't need to go inactive to do it. So let's say this Spitfire has a range of 60-something. Let's say I want to run a base transfer. And again, this happens in the movement phase. If I want to run a base transfer to this base, this is only 9 hexes away. It's less than half, so he does not have to go down to do that transfer. Now, if I want to move him 50 hexes away, which doesn't even fit on this map, then he would have to become inactive to do that. And then he would become active again during, my next aircraft refit phase. Okay. Air barrages, air ground support barrages, work just like artillery barrages. And in many cases, a lot of times players prefer them because they cost less supply. They cost however many tokens it was to refit the planes at an airfield as opposed to a supply token or two, or a supply point or two, to do an artillery barrage. But they basically function exactly the same. If I want to barrage this stack here, first of all, I need what's called a correct spotter. Well, I don't need a correct spotter. I can do it without it, but I'm at a substantial penalty for barraging without a spotter. It's 3 columns down for no spotter. All right, so if I want to hit this hex, this looks juicy, right? So that looks like, just because the top combat unit is showing. So the OCS Fog of War rule is that if there is a combat unit in the hex, that unit, then a combat unit should be on top of the stack. And then that is the only unit that the enemy can see. Now, if there are units in multiple modes in the stack, then you should, I'm not sure this is a rule, but we play with it. If there's a unit that throws a Zoc, meaning a combat mode unit in the stack, then you should have that unit on top. The only units that throw Zocs are attack-capable combat mode units, as I'm recalling that correctly. So I have a correct spotter up here. I want to fly this air barrage. It's going to be 4 planes, 24 points of barrage. It is subject to flak. There's no air base there, but it is +1 because there's more than 2 planes. It's not. I may have said this clumsily before. There is a bonus to flak if there's more than 2 planes. It's not per plane though. So 3 planes, 4 planes is still +1. So we're going to roll, once again, 2d6 +1 for flak. We rolled another, is that the same roll? All right, so there's no flak. So we're going to roll the barrage. And again, we just go to the barrage table. We're going to look at density. Now, this stack is going to get a density bonus. So Livorno Division is 3 REs, which means it's 3 steps, but it's 3 REs, which means that any one unit is only counted as 3 REs max for barrage purposes, but there's also 2 conf groups in the hex, each of which are 1 RE. The transport point and the supply points do not count. This truck, what we will call a truck, is actually called a transport point, and it is a non-combat unit. But the supply points are also non-combat units. They don't count for stacking. So we have 5 REs in the hex, which means that we have right 2, so we have 2 shifts up. But we're also in, what kind of terrain is that? That is rough terrain, right? Yeah. So that's rough terrain, which is, according to the Sicily 2 chart, is close. So that's down 1. So it's going to be up 2, down 1. So net up 1 column. So we'll roll again. So we'll find the 24 column, up 1 column. Up a column on a 24-point barrage is pretty effective. So we're going to hit, we have a 7. All right. So we're, what did I say, 24. We're up a column, so we rolled a 7, which is a DG. Now, let's say we rolled in. There's usually not any modifiers to this roll once you've figured the column out. Let's say we roll the bracketed 1/2. Okay, there's, in addition to DG, if you get a result at all on this table, it's DG. It's disorganized, okay, which we talked about already. The additional results are potential step losses. So a 1/2 means that there's a 1/2 chance that you'll do a step loss, which is why we roll the kicker on a 4, 5, or 6. If the kicker die is 4, 5, or 6, you've done a step loss. If the 1/2 is bracketed, however, then it just counts as DG if it's an air barrage or ship barrage, okay? Or if the unit is in a level 3 or 4 hedgehog, but most OCS games do not have level 3 or 4 hedgehogs. So this is an air barrage. So if we rolled that 8, it would be a bracketed 1/2, and it would not take a step loss, regardless of what our kicker result was. But in this case, it's just DG'd. And in the Vassal module, handily, we can just right-click on the entire stack, place DG, and Bob's your uncle. All right. We could cover train busting. Does anyone have any questions about any of the air stuff that I have just talked about? Otherwise, I'm going to start talking more about supply. Okay. Okay, so let's find that truck. Here's the truck. All right. So when you start a scenario, I'm going to... When you start a scenario and you have trucks stacked with supply points, you can decide when you're setting them up whether the supply points are on the trucks or they're on the ground. Generally speaking, you want them on the trucks because it's free points. Okay. To load or unload supply from a truck, regardless of the number of supply points, costs 1/10 of the transport points movement allowance. So for trucks, this is a truck. There's a we have a wagon here. Okay, so there's trucks, wagons, and in Sicily there's mules. I need to do an audio check here. Just a second. Costs. Okay, good. We're good on that. All right. So the truck to load, the cost to load or unload is 4.5 movement points for the truck, and it's 1 movement point for the wagon. However, 4.5 is awkward, so we round up to 5, and that is the actual rule. You round it up to 5. So if the things here, and that can happen at any point during movement. So if I'm driving along the road, 1, 2, 3, 3.5, then I can spend 5 to load that supply point, and I put it under the truck, under the transport point. So say we got 3.5, that costs 5, so we're now at 8.5. Whoops. 9, 10, 11, 12, wherever it's going to go. Okay. And then I can also load and unload an unlimited amount of time. So we said 12, 13, 14, 15, 15 and a half. I want to drop it here. So I just pull the counter off the top. 15 and a half goes to 19 and a half. And I can go back up to 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, so on and so forth. So if I have like 10 hexes and with a primary or secondary road connecting them, I can shuttle points back and forth. It just costs me 5 each time. And bear in mind that suddenly, if the weather's bad, that 45 movement point allowance that seems so enormous right now suddenly becomes a lot more restrictive. But again, that does not happen here in Sicily too. Now, wagons work exactly the same way. To load and unload, it costs 10% of their allowance, which is 1 point. They only have 10 points. However, it's leg movement. So, because it's foot movement, right? It's just the foot of horses instead of people. So, they're not as penalized by going off-road or by inclement weather. All right, so wagons are very useful. Can I increase size? I can. That's irritating. We can also... you're not really going to use extenders in Sicily too. If you have either 5 wagon points or 5 truck points in a single hex, you can flip the entire stack into what's called a supply extender, which has extra supply range and to which you can trace your trace supply. And then the extender traces backwards to a supply source. That is not something that's used in Sicily too. It is used in Smolensk. And of the in-print OCS games that are available at the moment, I do recommend Smolensk more probably than any of the other ones. I probably still would recommend... I mean, Korea's pretty good too, to be honest about it. But Smolensk gives you all of the various OCS features to play with, and you really need to learn them. All right. So I've been talking for almost 3 hours now, and I would like to open this up to questions, either from the voice chat or from the YouTube chat, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, based on the vibe I'm getting, I'm not sure anybody feels like moving pieces. I'll be happy to be corrected on that, because we do technically have another hour and 15 minutes.
Kind of overwhelming, but thank you very much. For supply, I saw in the chat someone was talking about adjacent is good enough. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, so it is used specifically for... I'm going to get super pedantic about this, because it is kind of pedantic. So let me grab some stuff and I'll explain it. Okay. I'm going to grab this Italian HQ, and we'll just throw this guy out of the way. And we'll put this Italian HQ here. All right. And I'm going to just wipe everything else out, because I don't want it to be distracting. This is one of those super weird fiddly bits in OCS. So, trace adjacent is close enough is used for trace supply, and that's it. It's not used for direct draw. But adjacent is still close enough for direct draw, because to direct draw, you only need to get to adjacent. Okay, this is what I mean when I say it's super duper pedantic. So let's say I have a situation here where I have supply points on the map, and I have a detrainable hex. So let's talk about detrainable hexes. So in general, what you need to trace supply to let me start that again. In general, trace supply will be thrown to your units by a headquarters. Okay, they can also draw it through direct draw, and you're doing that to a supply source, which is a detrainable hex that, generally speaking, depending on the game-specific rules, is connected to a friendly map edge. So, in this case, here we've got Termini Emeris is a detrainable hex, so I can trace to it. Okay, and this is useful for trace supply. We use the same rules for pushing supply points back and forth, but for this purposes, we're only talking about trace supply. So let me pull a KTX marker out, because these are just super useful to count. So to determine whether I can reach back to get supply, this HQ is the unit in question. So this HQ wants to throw to this guy up here. Okay, and we see this guy up here is not close to a detrainable hex. Let's ignore this one right here. Let's put him here instead, actually, and then he's just too far from that. And remember, it's always truck movement. So this guy wants to trace back to Termini Emeris. So we trace for draw. We trace back from the HQ. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that's fine. But let's say he's up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's out of reach. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's what I wanted. All right, so this is 5 truck movement back toward the supply source from the HQ. So again, that's 1 half, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5. However, for draw, I only need to get to adjacent to the supply source. I don't need to get all the way to the supply source. Okay, do we have that so far? Because I'm gonna phrase it differently for throw, which is where adjacent is close enough. So let's say we need to throw. So we've already established that we have a locked up module. Here we go. So we're 5 truck movement points from the HQ, tracing back to the supply source. We've gotten adjacent. That gets us adjacent to the supply source, so we can draw from there. And that's the case whether it's a detrainable hex that we're doing trace supply from, or whether it's a supply dump that we are pulling supply points from. Okay, if we want to say throw it to an armor division or something like that. Now, when we talk about throw, we can trace. This is 8. The throw range on this HQ is again 8 truck movements. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see these winding roads. 7, 8. Okay. But adjacent is close enough. So I only need to get to adjacent to the unit. I don't need to get all the way to the unit. Now, even if adjacent gets me here, I can still pull from across this river. Okay, that's not a problem. As long as the hex side is not impassable, I can still pull from across the headquarters can still throw across that river. Now, if this hex is got an enemy unit in it, then you're hosed. But otherwise, adjacent is close enough. It's 5 movement points back plus 1 hex, or however many truck movement points forward plus 1 hex. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that answers the question. So just to repeat what you just demonstrated, to draw, you trace back to the HQ, and it could be the truck movement plus 1, and then to throw, it's from the HQ forward, and it can be adjacent as close enough to that unit. However, the only thing you need to be aware of is enemy zone of control that will interrupt the,
correct. That's true.
Throw.
That's
okay.
True. Yes, but you always draw backward from the HQ. You always throw forward from the HQ. Okay, so you start counting at the HQ, not at the unit. That's important. It's usually not a big deal, but there are situations where it's a big deal because the path both ways is not necessarily the same. Now, the unit, let's say there's no HQ here, and this is just this, Italians out in the hillside. These guys could trace. They don't need the HQ. They can actually trace 5 movement points. Again, it's truck movement, even though the unit is a tracked movement. They could trace 5 because they're not running the tanks back to get the supplies. They're running cars and Kubelwagens and Jeeps or whatever back to get the supplies. So I can draw directly from the supply source or the dump on the ground if I don't have an HQ in the picture. So in a big map area like, say, any of the East Front games, you will have a mix of units drawing supply directly from supply sources and other units that are being thrown supply from their HQ. And again, bear in mind that the two different things that you do, the two different ways that you use supply. One is via trace, and if units are out of trace, there is a supply phase. If your units are out of trace during the supply phase, which is right after your movement phase, then they have to either eat off the map, which means they actually consume supply points on, that get burned because they ate them, or they have to suffer attrition. And if you look at the attrition table, you'll find that it varies, and you roll by stack, by the way, not by individual unit. So you want to use the unit with the highest action rating in the stack, and that's fine, but you could still lose the whole stack with, and I have lost an entire stack of 5 action rating troops because I rolled badly on the attrition roll. So that is a thing that happens. All right, more questions. You guys have me on the hook here, so now if you have questions, now's the time to ask. The other thing is, this is a good point. Go ahead, ask your question, then I'll get back to this.
A quick question: if you like, in the first area we had, they were already in the map, but the air mobile divisions, can you drop supply to units from aircraft, or
you can
outside of an? Okay, so you can drop it with the paratroops, so they have supply inherent with them. Okay.
Well, so in some cases, that's going to be a game-specific rule. In some cases, the troops, the airdropped troops, will be considered to be in supply for the first turn after they drop. I believe that's the case in Beyond the Rhine. And in other cases, you will have to actually drop them. So we do have air transport units. In this case, what do we have? We've got these C-47s and gliders. These will actually drop the airborne troops and some supplies. Now, let's say, oh crap, I got these guys isolated. I got to fly supplies to them. You can totally say, I'm going to fly a token, which is enough to feed 2 units off the map. I'm going to fly a token to these guys. And then I will have to, because if they're on an airfield, then you just fly into the airbase. If it's just out in the wilderness somewhere and there's no airfield, then you do have to make a roll to see if the supplies or whatever land successfully. And you actually have to make that same roll if you're airdropping troops. So that is an air transport mission. And it's used a lot in some games, and in other games it's not used very much. It's not used in games where there's like a plentiful land supply pipeline, but it's used a lot in games like this where there isn't a plentiful land supply pipeline for the Allies, and they have to basically, float in or fly in all their supply. So, all right, so Joe Prez in the YouTube chat mentions that there are situations, let me find. Yeah, this is a good example. Let's say I'm tracing. Where'd that HQ go? let's say I'm tracing from this HQ along this road. I'm never going to have enough truck points. If you look at this truck movement cost for mountain, it's prohibited. I'm never going to be even able to enter that mountain hex with truck movement points. And that is why adjacent is close enough. You can just get it to the foot of the mountain, and then the guys up the mountain have to hoof it up and down the mountain. So that is a good point. One HQ cannot throw to another HQ. An HQ can draw from an extender. That's what extenders are for. But it is the HQ drawing from the extender rather than the extender throwing to the HQ. That sounds semantic, but draw and throw are different related concepts. You draw from a supply source, you throw to a unit. And HQs can throw. Supply sources cannot throw. So if unless there's they're in the same hex, which is often the case. That's another point. A combat mode HQ in a rail hex, a railroad hex, is a detrainable hex. So I could trace to that, for example. But again, it is truck movement. You got to bear that in mind. So we'd be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I could get this far. 1, 2. Well, if I could get that far if I were drawing, but if I was throwing from the HQ, which you'd want to do, you could get farther. You could get 3 hexes farther. So I could throw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 8, and adjacent is close enough. I could throw to there.
And in that case, the railroad has to be able to trace a path back without enemy units, correct?
Correct.
Some other supply source.
Enemy units or Zocs do block a supply path. You can negate that block by having units in there yourself. So just to pull some random British units up here. And then a couple of miscellaneous Italians. So if I had this British unit right here, it's in combat mode. And again, you have to be in combat mode and be attack capable to throw a zone of control. That throws a zone of control into that hex with the KTX marker. Okay, so that blocks the supply throw or supply draw. But if I have a unit there, then that Zoc no longer blocks supply trace. So what you will see sometimes in big hairy congestions of units to make sure that you could still maintain your trace is a supply path back along the road, a couple of hexes behind the front, to make sure that they don't get blocked with Zocs. Okay, more questions. Yeah, the YouTube video will continue to be available after the fact. Don't forget though that this has been, partly stream of consciousness. I feel like it's been fairly disorganized. Don't forget that there's a instructional series coming that I'm putting a lot of effort into presenting everything in a very structured manner. So, and hopefully, like I said, it's my goal to get a couple of those out this month. That's a big project, though.
Go ahead. When you started the video, you said that the allied player for this scenario or this game is the first player. Are they the first player for every turn, or do you only do it for the first turn and then you have to roll for the next turn?
That is correct. You roll every turn except the first turn, where I'm unaware of any scenarios where you're rolling the first turn randomly. So every scenario, I think, will give you the first player. And it's not even just the first player. It is the first player. It's not telling you who rolled initiative. It's telling you who goes first. So in this scenario, for example, I'm going to pull up the Sicily 2 rules. And we'll pull up Scenario 1, Western Sicily. And we'll see general information. Map area west of hex row or hex column 31. Setup order, axis, and then allied. First player, allied. So the allied will be the first player, and then on turn 2 and on subsequent turns, unless there's a scenario-specific rule saying do it differently, you will roll initiative during the first player determination phase to decide who gets to make the decision of who goes first. Let's actually talk about that. So what that means is, now in, say, Western Sicily is a terrible example. Let's take the whole campaign. All right, so let's think about this in the context of the Sicily campaign, which is, I don't know, like 18, what is it? It's about 18 turns. So the Allies are going to go first on turn 1, and the Germans are going to go second. What is going to happen if the Germans win initiative, or what is going to happen if the Germans get the first turn on this, go first on the second turn? Okay, that means that the Germans will have 2 turns in a row, which is advantageous to the Germans. The Allies did not have the chance to make adjustments. However, if the Germans win the initiative, then they have a decision to make. Do I want to go first or do I want to go second? Because if I want to go first, maybe I could take advantage of that double turn, as we call it. Or maybe it's not worth it, because if I go first, even though I went last turn, I get 2 turns in a row, I'm setting up the Allies to go second in the turn, and then maybe they'll get a double turn right on top of that. So you have to balance whether when you decide that you're going first in a turn, you also are deciding to give the other player, the other side, an opportunity for a double turn down the line, right? So for that, among other reasons, and sometimes you're just not positioned to capitalize on that double turn, right? Remember, if you're going last in the turn and you win the initiative, you get to decide whether you're going to take the double turn or not. So can you, in a future double turn, you're setting yourself up to be able to do that. So you may decide, no, go first, you guys go first, because I want to maintain the option to have that double turn myself at a later time. Okay? So that is a thing that happens. That is, expect, even in a game as relatively short as Sicily 2, expect that initiative to shift several times in that way, such that there are several double turns, where the Allies go at the end of one turn, the Allies go at the beginning of the next turn, or vice versa.
In general, is it more advantageous for the attacking player to try to get the double than the defending, or
not necessarily?
Does it really not matter?
Not necessarily. The defense in OCS needs to be very active. You're not just sitting there behind static lines. There is no such thing as an impregnable line in OCS. Your opponent can and eventually will find a place to blow your line open, in which case, even as the defender, boy, you need to scramble to get units, to keep units from being pocketed, to reform a defensive line. So just as often, for defensive reasons, I will decide to go first. So the only game I think is a kind of an exception to this is Blitzkrieg Legend, because you kind of always want to go next in Blitzkrieg Legend, but it's a super short game. It's only like 14 turns, and that's why. So or 14 or 16 turns or something like that. But generally speaking, no, it's not as simple as saying, as the attacker, you generally want to take the advantage of the double turn. You still have to be positioned to take advantage of it. And you may decide that it would be better for you to have a double turn later than right now. As somebody who's played a fair amount as the Soviets, there have been plenty of occasions on which I have decided, no, we got to take the turn now, or else we're going to get torn open much worse than we are at the moment. More questions? Okay. So I'll be happy to hang around. Jig Forever says, I think this is a bit overstated. Says that he's heard that you should force your opponent to go first unless you can either win the game with a double turn or avoid losing. So, very seldom in OCS will there be a single turn in which you just win the game from, from first principles. That's going to be a relatively rare thing. Now, can you create a hugely disadvantageous situation for your opponent with a double turn? Yeah, potentially you can. I think this is a little this is a comment in from YouTube. I think that's a little overstated, but the sense of it is correct. If you're going to really get hosed, if your opponent gets a double turn, then you should go first. If you're going to be able to really hose your opponent, then you should take the double turn. Otherwise, you should consider not taking the double turn, because again, if it's your choice, you're setting yourself up for a double turn later when you can best take advantage of it. But you can never count on the exact timing either, so bear that in mind. Hethwill says you can mess up enemy operations by controlling the roads and breaking roads and rail lines and breaking the supply chains. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And in fact, that's something that is very easy to, it can be easy to take advantage of. If you're going to make like a big, deep penetration, then you have to protect that, or you want to anyway, to protect that penetration so that its supply lines cannot easily be cut. Sometimes you just have to risk it too, but that is absolutely a thing that can happen. So if we end up with, this situation, and we end up with this giant-ass infantry division blocking the roads back here, then that absolutely cuts those units off. And they can't trace to detrainable hex either, because the detrainable hex is in Azak. And it actually, even the adjacent hex is in Azak. That airbase is also a non-combat unit and does not project a zone of control of any kind. More questions? Anybody? All right, so I think in that case, we are about ready to call it, unless somebody pipes up in the next 30 seconds or so. Hopefully, everybody has found this fairly informative. If this seems like a lot, then I'll be honest with you, it is kind of a lot, but it is also a system that is very rewarding to play once you do have all this down. And it is learnable. If I can learn it, anybody can learn it. So I have absolute confidence in everybody here that you can actually master OCS given enough time. But, the best way to do it is what somebody mentioned in the chat earlier before. If you don't have an opponent, and it's not that hard to find opponents online, just blow up a vassal module, set it up, start moving pieces. Just go through the sequence of play, start moving pieces, start doing all this calculation and stuff like that, and you'll eventually get the hang of it. The key is to follow the sequence exactly and look up rules as you need to. That's how I learned to play most games, is by actually pushing pieces around and looking pieces up as I need. I didn't actually learn OCS that way because we have a huge OCS community here, but
I do have one more question.
Go ahead.
So the latest series, rules for everything is 4.3. Are those backwards? Can you play every game with those, or do certain games require older versions of the series rules?
The only game that you cannot play with those rules is the original Guderian's Blitzkrieg. And the reason for that is that the supply works quite differently. So supply points are right now, right? And this has been the case for a long time since those original rules. You're basically spending supply points for combat supply and for fuel, okay? And to eat off the map if you need to, which is an inefficient use of supply. You want to avoid that if you can. That's what you spend supply points for. Everything else is just handled through trace. Original Guderian's Blitzkrieg didn't have trace. everybody ate off the map. So you'd get, you got 120 supply points this turn, and then you have to feed all the units on the map. So that's the big reason why you can't play the original Guderian's Blitzkrieg with the current rules. Every other game does work totally fine. And there are, on OCS Depot, I think there's some conversion notes, because there are some additional notes to retrofit some of the really old games. And bear in mind also that some of those games have been replaced, right? Guderian's Blitzkrieg replaced by Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2, which I've played a couple of times, and which is a fantastic game. Enemy at the Gates, the second game in the series, replaced by Case Blue. Did I say? Yeah, Guderian's Blitzkrieg was replaced by Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. Enemy at the Gates was replaced by Case Blue. Tunisia was replaced by Tunisia 2. Hube's Pocket, or Huba's Pocket, has been now replaced by Third Winter. So all those older games in the series are obsolete, but the only one that's actually not playable with the current rules is the original Guderian's Blitzkrieg. And in fact, one of the cheats to get around the price of Case Blue is to go find yourself a copy of Enemy at the Gates, which has, half a Case Blue in there, and you could totally play it with the current rules. The amount, version 4 of the rules has been around for like 10 or 15 years. So it's there are changes from version to version, but they're really small these days. Somebody mentions, Joe Perez mentions in the chat, that in a lot of Dean Essig games you defend best by attacking. There is a lot of truth to that. There's certainly plenty of cutting and running, say as the Soviets or the Italians. But you also do want to counterattack. You don't just want to retreat and try and keep your lines tidy. You do want to counterattack in places. And you want to take advantage of opponent mistakes, too. So if, for example, the opponent can be, opponent makes a deep penetration and can be cut them off. Make it force them to scramble for supply or to roll for attrition. We should do this with Brazen Chariots. Maybe that's a 2023 project. One of my goals for the year is to get BCS back on the table, which might be happening sooner rather than later. But today we're talking about OCS, and we're going to be very focused on OCS for at least the next 2 months because of the upcoming convention schedule. So let me mention that. If anybody is near Ohio, we have a big convention, Buckeye Game Fest, which has a week-long war room. It's first week of April, I think. Buckeye Game Fest, Google it, you'll find it. Let me know, anybody. Folks should have my email, ardwulfslair@gmail.com. If you want to come, let me know. We will make sure that there is a game for you. There is always, 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 always at least one OCS game. And actually, I'm not sure I've ever seen less than 2 OCS games, like big OCS games. So if you want to play OCS face-to-face, I can't think of any place where you could do that better than in Columbus, Ohio. Strangely enough. All right, any other questions, comments, feedback?
No, it was really good. This is the second time I've done a demo at an online convention with you, and it's finally starting to kind of sink in a bit. So there's just a lot of concepts.
It is a lot of concepts, but you do want to play it, right? I mean, it really helps to play it. And I think next time we're going to probably not frame this as a boot camp and say maybe we'll run like an actual event and one of the big OCS games and see if we can get a whole turn in. Not super big, but, bigger than this. Say Smolensk might be a good target.
Yeah, we did that first demo I did with you, and that was quite good. Though Sicily is kind of a different environment, different way of thinking about some stuff too. So I kind of enjoyed having the different ones because, like you said, the truck extensions in Smolensk. Without those, you just run out of supply almost immediately. It seems like, but
yeah, within the first about 4 or 5 turns, the Germans will be at the end of their tether. Without extenders, one of the first things that you need to start doing in Smolensk as the Germans is setting up that extender. You got to figure out where that's going to be and start working towards making that happen. So that's an absolute. Sicily is a very different beast. I wanted to, I've done Smolensk 3 times now as in boot camps, and I wanted to do something different. Having done it with Sicily, I think Smolensk is a better choice. But, So, Jim, you'll be able to watch the whole thing in replay, and I'm talking almost the entire time. So, I am now going to go find a lozenge. All right. So, I'd like to wish everybody a great night. I'd like to thank everybody who signed up for the event, as well as the additional, however many folks it's been in and out of the YouTube chat. We have 32 watching right now, and I don't know if there was more than that at any point because I haven't been paying particularly close attention to it. It's a bit hard to keep track of voice chat and the mic going out and the Vassal module and the Discord and the YouTube chat all at the same time. So everybody have a great night, and reach out to me if you have questions.